Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. It was just after 3 in the morning when it happened. Me and Bobby were working the overnight shift on a repaving crew about 40 miles outside Missoula, out on Highway 200. That stretch between Potomac and Ovando is dead quiet at night. No houses, no gas stations, just pine forest and the occasional truck hauling through. We were on mile marker 84, laying down fresh asphalt in the eastbound lane. Most of the crew had wrapped up by then. Just the two of us left, finishing cleanup and waiting on a tanker to bring more oil. Our supervisor, Ken, had driven off to meet the truck back near Clearwater Junction, said he'd be maybe an hour. So we were out there, standing in the dark with our vests and headlamps on, leaning against the pickup and shooting the breeze. Clear sky, warm for May, probably high 50s, and bone quiet. You could hear the wind brushing through the trees if you stopped talking long enough. Around 3:20, I think, Bobby lit a cigarette and pointed up at the stars. Said something dumb about Orion's belt being crooked, and I looked up just to humor him. I didn't see Orion. I saw something else. There was this patch of sky, almost directly overhead, where the stars just disappeared. Like someone had taken a cookie cutter to the night. It was shaped kind of like a boomerang, but real wide and subtle, no sharp corners. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't already been looking up. It wasn't lit or glowing, it wasn't reflecting anything. It was just there, darker than the sky around it, and moving. It passed over us slower than a plane, but it was huge, massive. You couldn't see edges exactly, just this shape blotting out stars as it moved. No noise, not even a hum. I kept expecting to hear jets or rotors, but there was nothing. Bobby saw it too. He stopped mid-sentence and just stared. Neither of us said anything for maybe 10 seconds. We watched it glide from east to west, right across the highway and over the trees. It didn't cast a shadow, even with our work lights aimed up a bit. The stars reappeared behind it like nothing had been there. Once it was gone, Bobby finally spoke, just said, "What the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. We stood there for a minute longer, looking where it went, then back at each other. Then I realized the forest had gone completely still. No insects, no birds, nothing. The kind of silence that presses on your ears. Bobby noticed it too. He flicked his cigarette and said we should wait in the truck. So we got in, closed the doors, and sat there with the engine off. A couple minutes later, the sound came back. Crickets, a far-off owl, wind in the branches, like flipping a switch. That's when I started wondering if we'd imagined it. But we hadn't both seen the same shape, same path, same silence, just to make it up. 10 minutes after that, Ken radioed in and said he'd be delayed. Something about a washout past the junction. Told us to sit tight another 45 minutes. We didn't say anything to him. Didn't seem worth it. Bobby stayed quiet the rest of the night. I caught him looking up a few times, real quick, like he didn't want to see it again. Next day, we didn't mention it to the rest of the crew. When Ken asked how the night shift went, Bobby just said, "Uneventful." And that was that. But I've driven that stretch maybe 20 times since, and I don't look up when I'm alone anymore. It was supposed to be just another weekend thing. I'd been helping my friend Tyler run a little side project where we documented weird sightings around upstate New York. We weren't experts or anything. We both worked day jobs in Albany. But we'd drive out to spots people emailed us about, take photos, maybe shoot some B-roll, and upload it to our YouTube channel. It was small time, mostly a hobby. This particular trip was to a patch of woods near Middleburg, where a guy claimed to see lights land behind his property line. The guy's name was Len. He was in his 60s, I think. Real quiet, real serious. Said he saw 3 white lights drop below the treetops around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. No noise, no wind. Said he hiked out the next day and found a big ring in the moss, perfectly round, maybe 20 feet wide. He'd emailed us photos. The ground did look weird. Flat, dry, like something had pressed it down. So we drove up there Saturday afternoon, parked off a dirt shoulder and hiked in with a couple cameras and a cheap EMF meter Tyler liked to bring for fun. It took us about 40 minutes to reach the clearing. The ring was still there, maybe not as sharp as in lens photos, but you could tell something had disturbed the area. The ground was compacted, the moss around the edge was a different color. We spent a couple hours out there. Got drone footage, took soil samples, just to say we did. At one point, Tyler said he felt a vibration through his boots, but I didn't feel anything. There was no sound, no wind either. I remember thinking it was unusually still for the middle of the woods, no birds, no bugs, just the occasional creak of trees. We wrapped around dusk and headed back to the car. The drive home was normal. We stopped for burgers and joked about how Len might have just dragged a kiddie pool out there and scared himself. Got back to the apartment a little after 10. Tyler and I had been roommates for 3 years, split level, second floor of a 3-story walk-up on Western Avenue. As soon as we got to our door, we knew something was off. The handle wasn't fully latched. It nudged open when I pushed it. At first I thought maybe Tyler forgot to lock it, but he swore he always double checks. We went in slow, thinking maybe someone broke in, but nothing was missing. Our laptops were still on the desk, TV was there, drawers untouched, but every mirror in the apartment had been flipped. The one above the bathroom sink was turned to face the wall. Same with the full-length mirror in my bedroom. Tyler's mirror, the one hanging above his dresser, was lying face down on the carpet. No glass broken, nothing else disturbed. We checked the windows, but they were all still locked from the inside. We didn't call the cops. I don't know why. I guess because technically nothing was stolen and there was no sign of forced entry. Just that one detail, the mirrors. That night, we barely talked. Tyler stayed in the living room and kept the lights on. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone standing just outside the edge of my vision. No noise, no movement, just watching. Around 3 a.m., I got up to get water and found Tyler already standing by the window, looking out through the blinds. "There's someone down there," he said, without turning. I stepped closer and looked where he was pointing. Across the street under the sodium street lamp stood a man in a black suit. No coat, no umbrella, even though it had started to drizzle. He had pale skin and no hat. His arms hung perfectly straight at his sides. He was staring up at our window, not moving, not pacing, just standing there. I asked if he'd been there long, and Tyler said he'd first noticed him about half an hour ago. We watched for another 10 minutes. He didn't look away. I took a photo on my phone, but when I checked it, the guy wasn't in the frame. Just an empty street. Tyler wanted to go down and confront him. I didn't. I said we should just wait. Eventually, sometime after 4, the man walked away. Not toward a car. Not into a building. Just turned and disappeared around the corner. No rush in his step. The next day, we both called out of work. I checked the locks again. Nothing was broken. We talked about what to do next. Report it, ignore it, maybe move. Neither of us really believed we were in danger, but we also couldn't explain what was happening. That afternoon, we tried logging into the channel to review the footage from the woods. The drone clips were there. So were the photos and the soil sample stuff. But the files from Tyler's handheld, the ones where he'd walked through the ring and talked about the soil, were gone. Just gone. Not corrupted, not mislabeled, like they were never recorded. We checked the SD card on my laptop and his. Same result. No files past a certain timestamp, right around the time we noticed the weird quiet in the clearing. That night, just before bed, I looked out the window again. There was no one on the street, but one of the street lamps, the one directly across from our building, kept flickering. On, off, back on, like someone was playing with the power. I watched it for a while, then closed the blinds. Neither of us said anything about it the next morning. Just made coffee and went about our day like normal. But that wasn't the last time I saw the man. I was chasing a storm out in the Oklahoma plains, late April, the kind of that either breaks or makes you if you're into this sort of thing. I've been doing it for years, mostly freelance now, picking up gigs for local news and weather sites. Nothing fancy, just me, my truck, and a camera. That afternoon, the sky was this insane mix of dark gray and green. the kind that makes you feel like the air itself is charged. I was following a funnel cloud northwest of Tulsa, just off some empty back roads. The wind was howling, dust whipping around, and the storm was building fast. I pulled over on a gravel shoulder, set up my camera on the tripod, and started filming the funnel from a safe distance. The cloud was rotating steady, thick at the base, tearing across the flat land. I was focused on the usual stuff, the swirling dust, lightning off in the distance, the way the clouds shifted and twisted. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught something that didn't fit. There was a faint shimmer, like a reflection or maybe a heat haze, just above the funnel's tip. I adjusted the zoom and got a better look. At first, I thought it was debris caught in the updraft, but this was too smooth, too precise. It looked like some kind of metallic object floating or hovering, catching the fading sunlight in a way that made it gleam. The shape was vague, sort of oval, maybe the size of a small car, but it moved slowly, deliberately, not spinning, not tumbling, just holding position like it was watching the storm or riding its edge. I kept filming, heart pounding, trying to stay steady. The wind was getting worse, and I could feel rain starting to spit. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 minutes before the funnel started shifting direction, and the metallic shape faded away behind it, swallowed by the clouds. I packed up fast and started heading back toward town, adrenaline buzzing, but trying to keep my head clear. That night, I uploaded the footage to my YouTube channel and sent it to a couple of storm-chasing forums. The next morning, the video had gone viral. Tens of thousands of views, people speculating nonstop. Some thought it was a drone, others said it was a reflection or a trick of the light. Me, I wasn't sure what to think. But then, the weird stuff started. Around noon, the day after the video went viral, I got a call on my cell from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end said they were an insurance agent, asking if I'd had any recent wind damage to the brain. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some prank or a weird joke. But the voice was serious, almost clinical, like they were reading from a script. "We're just checking for any cognitive impairments caused by severe wind exposure," they said. "It's routine for anyone involved in high-risk weather events." I told them no, I was fine, and asked who they were with. The line went silent for a moment, then the caller hung up. I tried calling the number back right away. It was disconnected. That was when the footage vanished. My YouTube channel was still there, but the video itself was gone. No explanation, no takedown notice, nothing. I tried uploading it again from my backup copy, but it wouldn't process. I asked around in the forums, but anyone who had saved or shared it seemed to lose their copies too. Files corrupted or mysteriously deleted. After that, I started noticing other things. My phone would beep randomly with no notifications. Sometimes, when I looked up the sky, there'd be strange reflections or quick flashes in the clouds. Nothing solid, just flickers, like something was trying to stay hidden but couldn't help revealing itself. One night, driving home from a diner, my radio cut out completely for a full 5 minutes. No static, no sound at all, just dead silence, even though the engine and everything else were fine. I checked my car the next day. No issues. I kept waiting for someone official to contact me, maybe asking for the footage or an interview. Nothing. It's been a couple of months now. I still chase storms, but I stay away from funnels and anything that gets too close. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, the metallic shape, the call, the missing video, but the memory of that shimmer above the funnel cloud, that's burned in there. I don't know what it was. I just know it wasn't part of any storm I'd ever seen before. I was driving back to California after helping my sister move to Austin. I didn't want to blow money on a motel, and I've always been fine crashing in my truck if I need to. I was somewhere along Route 62, not far from 29 Palms, but still a good ways out. I'd been on the road for hours and figured I'd stop for the night once I got past the last gas station in Parker. It was late, probably close to 1:30 in the morning when I pulled off onto a dirt shoulder. No lights around, no other cars, just that wide-open Mojave night. Stars overhead, dry air, that low hum of nothing. I left the driver's window cracked a few inches and shut off the engine. Rolled my hoodie into a pillow, reclined the seat back, and knocked out pretty fast. I don't know what time I woke up, but it was still dark. The sky had that early pre-dawn feel, like it was technically morning, but the sun hadn't shown up yet. What got me wasn't a sound or movement, it was this feeling. Like I just surfaced from a weird dream I couldn't remember, and something wasn't right. At first I thought maybe my phone had gone off or something, but the cab was quiet. No buzzing, no headlights, no passing cars. I sat up a little and looked around. That's when I noticed all the windows were fogged, every single one of them. Front windshield, side windows, even the tiny triangle in the back. But it wasn't the kind of fog you get from breathing in a closed car. It was thick and smeared, like someone had taken a wet rag and wiped every window from the outside. I blinked a few times and just stared at it, trying to process. The air outside was dry as bone when I'd parked. No humidity, no dew, no condensation. It didn't make any sense. I leaned forward and wiped a spot on the inside of the windshield with my sleeve. Clear. The fog wasn't inside, it was all on the outside. That put a weird pit in my stomach. I reached for the dome light, but hesitated. Something about flipping it on felt wrong, like I didn't want to see what might be outside. I stayed still and kept quiet, listening. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. Not even wind, just silence. I finally cracked the door open, slow. The air hit me right away, cold and dry. Definitely not damp enough for that kind of condensation. I stepped out and closed the door gently behind me. The ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel, not a trace of moisture anywhere. I walked a slow circle around the truck, checking the windows. The fogging was even, smudged like it had been wiped with cloth or a hand, long swipes and wide arcs. Some spots had streaks, like fingers had dragged across them. Not like a person trying to look in, more like someone trying to clean them. That's what it looked like someone had tried to clean the windows from the outside in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert. I crouched down and looked under the truck. Nothing there. No footprints, no marks in the dirt. I don't know what I was expecting, but it felt too quiet, too still. I climbed back in and locked the doors. The smell in the truck seemed different then, too. Not bad, just off. Like old copper or ozone, faint but there. I didn't remember it when I fell asleep. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement behind me. But the road was empty. I turned the key and the truck started up fine. Headlights lit up the dirt and low shrubs ahead. I put it in drive and pulled back onto the road without really thinking about it. I drove for about 5 minutes before I noticed something else. The radio display had reset, time, presets, everything. Like the battery had been disconnected. I hadn't touched it. I checked my phone next. The clock was weird. It said 5:42 a.m., but the sky didn't look right for that. I mean, it was still dark, like before dawn dark, not the early light kind of 5:42. I figured maybe I just lost track of time or the mountains were blocking the sun, but it didn't sit right. Another thing, I'd only meant to nap for a couple hours. Maybe 3, tops. I'd parked around 1:30, and the last time I looked at my phone was 1:47 a.m., right before I dozed off. If it really was 5:42, that meant nearly 4 hours had gone by. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like I just blinked. I made it to 29 Palms a little after 6. The sun was finally up by then. I stopped at a gas station, got a coffee, and used the bathroom. While I was washing my hands, I checked my face in the mirror and saw this thin red mark across my neck, almost like a pressure line from a tight seatbelt, but it was higher, near my jaw. I hadn't been wearing anything tight, just a hoodie, no collar. That's when it all started to really get to me. The fogged windows, the wiped glass, the smell, the time weirdness, the radio. None of it added up. I kept trying to find normal explanations. Maybe someone messed with the truck while I was asleep. Maybe I just slept longer than I thought. Maybe the battery glitched. But I've slept in that truck plenty of times, in different places. I've never seen the windows fogged like that, and definitely not in the desert with no humidity, no breath inside, and no sign of anything around me. I drove straight home that day, didn't stop except for gas. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I checked every inch of the truck again. No damage, no missing stuff, but that faint metallic smell was still there, clinging to the fabric, even with the windows rolled down most of the way home. The next night, I dreamed about a light. Not a shape, not a ship, just a bright white light, close and soundless, hanging above me. I don't know if it was really a dream or something left over from that night, but I haven't slept in the truck since. I was working a late-night delivery shift for a pizza place just outside Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just me, the car, and the endless loop of quiet streets. It was early October, and the air had that damp chill that feels like it's seeping into your bones. The kind of night where even the streetlights seem tired. I had about 3 deliveries left, and I was cruising through a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where houses have big yards and people keep their porch lights off. The road was straight, lined with tall maples that had started shedding leaves. Nothing but the occasional crackle under my tires and my radio playing softly. About halfway down the block, I noticed something hovering near the edge of the road about 20 feet ahead. At first, I thought it was one of those cheap drones people buy for fun, maybe some kid messing around late at night. It was a small, dark shape, about the size of a basketball, just floating there maybe 6 or 7 feet above the ground. I slowed the car, curious. The thing didn't move. It just hovered silently. No blinking lights or anything that drones usually have. I rolled down my window and cut the radio so I could hear better. That's when I noticed it wasn't making a sound either. No motor noise, no whirring, nothing. It stayed perfectly still for maybe 20 seconds. Then it started to rotate. Slow at first, like it was scanning or looking around, but the rotation was smooth, controlled, and precise. Not at all like a drone bobbing in the wind. I felt a little uneasy, but I was still thinking it had to be a drone, just some new model I hadn't seen. Then, suddenly, it zipped straight up, shooting almost vertically like someone hit the afterburner. No buzzing, no jet noise, just this silent, clean ascent that was impossible for anything I'd ever seen flying low. It disappeared straight into a low layer of clouds. 1 second it was there, the next it was just gone, like it vanished. I sat there for a minute, staring up at the gray sky, my heart ticking up a notch. The clouds were thin and wispy, not the kind that usually swallow things whole. It didn't make sense. I kept driving, shaking my head, trying to make sense of it. The rest of my deliveries went by without anything else weird, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone or something was watching. At one point, I caught headlights behind me way too often, but every time I glanced back, the road was empty. When I finally got home, I told my roommate, Dan, about it, but he just laughed and said I was probably tired or seeing things. That night, I kept hearing a faint humming through the walls of the apartment, but every time I got up to check, there was nothing out of place. I double-checked the doors and windows, and everything was locked tight. Over the next few days, I found small things out of place in the apartment. A kitchen drawer slightly open when I was sure I closed it, a misplaced book on the shelf. Nothing that screamed break-in, but odd enough to make me glance over my shoulder more than usual. I don't know what that thing was that night. Definitely not a drone. Whatever it wasn't here for fun. I was out walking my dog Milo just before dawn one Saturday morning. It was late October in rural Vermont, and the sky was still that deep gray blue you get before sunrise, with a thin fog hanging low over the fields. The air was cool and damp, the kind that seeps into your bones if you're not wearing a jacket. Milo and I usually took the same route, down the lane behind our house, past the old Miller farm, and then through the open field that stretched between the road and the edge of the woods. The farm had been abandoned for years, and the fields were starting to grow wild. But it was one of Milo's favorite spots because he could run without the leash. That morning, everything felt normal at first. I threw his ball a few times, and he chased it happily through the dew-covered grass. The fog was thick enough that the distant tree line was blurry, and the horizon looked like it just disappeared into the mist. As Milo was sniffing near the fence that separates the field from the neighboring property, I noticed something strange. A shape was hovering maybe 100 yards away, just over the middle of the field. It wasn't moving, just there, floating maybe 6 or 7 feet above the ground. At first, I thought it was one of those weather balloons or some kind of farm equipment left hanging on wires or something, but it didn't look like anything I'd seen before. The shape was sort of oval, kind of like an old metal canister, but bigger, about the size of a small car. Its surface was reflective, almost mirror-like, but it didn't gleam with sunlight or reflect the foggy sky in the way normal metal would. It looked dull, but shiny at the same time, like it was coated in some weird matte chrome. Milo suddenly stopped and sat down beside me. Usually, he'd be dragging me forward at this point, eager to explore or chase birds. But that morning, he was still, his ears perked up and his eyes locked on the shape, fixed and wide. I called his name a few times, but he didn't move. I tried tugging the leash, but he just planted his paws and stayed seated stiff. I stood there, staring at the shape, feeling kind of silly. Maybe I was just tired or letting my imagination get the better of me. But there was this tension in the air, like the usual sounds of the morning. Birds, wind, distant tractors had been muted as if the world had quieted down around that spot. I kept watching the shape, trying to figure out what it could be. The fog seemed to be swirling slightly around it, but the shape itself didn't blur or fade like the grass or trees did. It was too clear, too solid. After what felt like maybe 5 minutes, but might have been longer, Milo finally got up and started pulling on the leash again. I looked away for a second to check my watch, and when I glanced back, the shape was gone. Just vanished. There was no sound of it lifting off or moving. No rustle of wind, no hum, no noise at all. The fog was still rolling over the field, but there was no trace of whatever had been there. Milo seemed a little shaken too. He stayed close, his tail low, and wouldn't stop looking back at the empty spot. We finished the walk a little quicker than usual. Back at home, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was probably a trick of the light or some piece of trash I hadn't noticed before. But the weird part was, later that day, when I told my neighbor about it, a guy named Hank who grew up in these parts, he looked at me like I was nuts. There's nothing out in that field for miles except some old scrap the mill left behind, and it doesn't just float, he said, frowning. You sure you didn't just see a reflection from your phone or something? I thought about it. I wasn't using my phone at the time. I was just standing there, watching. And Milo's behavior was what stuck with me most. He's usually so chill. But that morning, he acted like he was seeing something dangerous or unexplainable. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on the field whenever I walked Milo in the morning. Nothing appeared. The fog rolled in on schedule, the grass grew, and the crows still squawked from the old trees. But sometimes, when the fog was thick just like that morning, I'd get this weird feeling, like someone or something was watching from the edge of the field. I'd catch Milo's ears twitching, his gaze fixing on empty space where I couldn't see a thing. I asked Hank again if he'd ever heard of anything strange around there, and he said only the usual local stories, old legends about strange lights or sounds that nobody really believed. I've thought about going back to the field at night, trying to see if anything happens then, but the memory of that dull, hovering shape and the way Milo froze in place still kind of holds me back. I don't know what I saw that morning. Whatever it was, it didn't make a sound, didn't move, and disappeared without a trace. And Milo definitely wasn't imagining it. I guess some things just don't fit into explanations, and you have to live with that. I was about 10 miles southeast of Groom Lake when it happened. Not on the base, obviously. I'm not that reckless. But on BLM land outside the perimeter where you can hike out and camp without bothering anyone. This was last fall, mid-October. Dry, no wind, mid-40s at night. Perfect conditions for a time lapse. I'd driven up from Alamo around sunset in my old Tacoma, took the dirt trail off Mailbox Road, and parked near a rocky outcrop that gave a decent view of the western horizon. It's remote out there. You don't see headlights after dark, no towers, no fences, just sagebrush, gravel, and empty sky. I set up my gear maybe 50 yards from the truck. Sony A7 on a slider rig pointed northwest with an intervalometer set to shoot one frame every 10 seconds. I had a portable battery pack hooked up, enough juice to run all night. I was mainly aiming to catch the Milky Way rotation over the ridgeline, maybe a few satellites or meteors if I was lucky. Around 8:45, the stars started popping out. crystal clear. No planes, no noise, just the faint chirping of crickets and the click of my shutter every few seconds. I laid out on my sleeping pad next to the tripod, staring up, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing weird for a while. The Big Dipper was high, Mars was low over the hills, Orion starting to climb up behind me. Then, sometime after 11, I wasn't checking my watch much, I noticed a single light appear low over the ridge. Not a plane. It didn't blink, just a steady white dot like a star, except too close and too bright. Maybe the size of Venus on a good night. It rose slowly, maybe 5 degrees above the ridge, and just hovered. I sat up and watched it. The camera kept shooting behind me. I thought maybe it was a drone, except there was no sound. None. Not even a whisper of rotor wash. And I've heard drones before. I fly one for work. They whine, even at a distance. This thing was silent. It hovered for maybe a minute, then it split. Clean. No flare, no burst, just 2 smaller lights peeled off from either side, same brightness, moving out horizontally. One went left, one went right. All 3 held a perfect triangle for a few seconds, equidistant, unmoving. Then the left one started moving north, slow and smooth, while the right one drifted south. The original one stayed put, still no sound. I stood up, grabbed the camera off the rig, and pointed it manually, trying not to shake. The screen showed all 3 lights clear as day. No strobe, no navigation lights. They weren't stars. They weren't planes. The pattern was too rigid. The 2 outside lights curved back in, like boomerangs, rejoining the center point one at a time. Not fast, not jerky, just precise. And then the second they touched, the light winked out. Gone. I stood there a full minute, not breathing. Just listening. No wind, no insects. Just the faint tick of the camera still running on the time-lapse. I didn't hear a departure, no sonic boom, no fade. It didn't speed away. It just vanished. I kept the camera running another 2 hours. Nothing else showed up. Back in Alamo the next day, I dumped the card onto my laptop. The footage was there, every frame. I played it back at 24 frames per second. For most of the sequence, it was stars, clouds drifting, maybe a shooting star. But at frame 979, the light appears. By frame 985, it splits. Frames 1002 through 1011 show all 3 lights in formation. And then by frame 1027, it's a single light again. Frame 1030, gone. I checked the EXIF data, no exposure glitches, no light leaks, just clean frames. I slowed it down further, frame by frames. The shapes held position between frames, no blur, no trails, just static, perfect dots. Then movement, then gone. I showed it to my coworker, Mike, who does drone mapping for ranchers. He leaned in, squinted, and asked where I shot it. When I told him, he didn't say anything. Just handed the laptop back and said, could be heat mirage, which it wasn't. At night, in 40-degree air, the part that sticks with me most, more than the lights even, was the silence. No wind, no animals, not even the crunch of gravel under my boots while I moved. It was like everything had gone still for those 10 minutes. I've gone out since then, same spot, different nights. Set up the rig, watched the sky, never saw it again. It was around 4 a.m. when I decided to take Baxter out for his usual early morning walk. I live on the edge of town, just where the houses start to thin out and the streetlights give way to darkness. The sky was clear, no moon, just a handful of stars glimmering faintly above the rooftops. The air had that cold, still feeling of early spring, sharp but not bitter. Baxter was restless that morning, more energetic than usual, tugging at the leash with his usual mix of excitement and urgency. I thought a quick walk before sunrise would help burn off some of his energy. So I grabbed his leash, put on my jacket, and stepped out the front door. The neighborhood was silent except for the crunch of gravel beneath my boots and the faint sound of Baxter's nails clicking on the pavement. The houses were dark, all curtains drawn. I felt the usual calm that comes with walking in the pre-dawn hours, that quiet solitude before the day starts. We headed down the street, and Baxter was sniffing around, pulling me toward the small patch of trees at the end of the cul-de-sac. As we got closer, I noticed something strange in the sky. 3 lights, very bright, arranged in a perfect triangle. They weren't blinking or moving, just hanging there, fixed and steady. The lights were white, but not harsh like headlights or street lamps. They had a soft glow, almost like they were glowing from within. I stopped walking and looked up. Baxter froze next to me, his body rigid, ears flat against his head. He trembled a little, like he was scared, but didn't want to run. That's when the feeling hit me, like something was wrong, like the air itself had thickened. I glanced around, expecting maybe to see someone else outside or a car driving by, but the street was empty and still. No sound except for the faint rustle of leaves in a slight breeze. The triangle of lights stayed there, perfectly still. I reached out to scratch Baxter's head, trying to calm him, but he didn't move. Instead, his eyes stayed locked on the lights, wide and unblinking. I tried to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just a weird reflection, or some new drone, or a radio tower. I squinted, trying to make out anything behind the lights, but the sky was just black. After what felt like several minutes, the lights began to fade. Not slowly, but like someone turned down a dimmer switch. They got weaker and weaker until they disappeared completely, leaving only the stars behind. Baxter stayed frozen for a few seconds after the lights vanished, then finally relaxed. I unclenched my fingers on the leash and gave him a gentle squeeze. He looked up at me, confused, like he couldn't understand what just happened. I kept walking after that, but the street felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the world was holding its breath. Baxter stayed close, looking around like he was on alert. I checked my phone for the time. It was still just after 4:10 a.m. When we got back to the house, I opened the door and looked back out the window. The sky was empty now, normal. I told myself I'd imagined it all, but Baxter's behavior didn't add up. I haven't told anyone about it, not really. People say you should call the cops or the news if you see weird lights, but this wasn't like that. It was quieter, stranger. I'm still trying to figure out what it was, but I don't have answers. Just a dog that wouldn't move, and 3 lights in a perfect triangle hanging silently above a neighborhood that wasn't ready to wake up yet. It was a short night flight from Salt Lake City to Winnemucca, just a personal run, nothing official. I fly a little Cessna 182, older but well-maintained, and I've done that route more times than I can count. The air was smooth that night. Visibility was excellent, even with the moon still low. Around 10:15 p.m., I was cruising at 9,500 feet, trimmed out and steady. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I was maybe 25 minutes out from the Nevada line when I noticed a faint glow out of the corner of my eye, off to the right. At first, I thought it was just a ground light, maybe a ranch or some kind of vehicle, but it looked too high. I leaned toward the window and saw 3 dim white lights arranged vertically, maybe 10 or 15 miles out. They weren't moving horizontally, just slowly rising, perfectly straight. At first, I thought they might be reflections or stars, but they were too low for stars, and the spacing between them didn't change as I banked a little to get a better angle. I flipped on my map light and double-checked the chart, nothing out there. No towers, no airfields, no controlled airspace. I keyed the mic. Salt Lake Center. This is November 785, Mike Romeo. Just checking. You seeing any traffic in my 10 o'clock at maybe 10:05? 3 lights, vertically stacked, ascending slowly. There was a pause. Then 785 Mike Romeo, negative. You're the only radar return in that sector. Can you confirm bearing? I told them it looked like 10 o'clock from my position, maybe 15 degrees off nose left and still climbing. They came back a second later saying they showed no traffic, civilian or otherwise, within a 50-mile radius. That's when I started feeling off. I don't know how else to describe it. Not afraid exactly, but something felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be seeing what I was seeing. The lights kept rising, slow and steady, like they were pacing me, but vertically. They were dim, not blinking, steady white, not strobes, not nav lights, just 3 solid dots. Then a 4th one appeared below them. No sudden flare, it just faded in, like the others. I asked Center again, Salt Lake, you sure there's no tower lighting or weather balloons or anything out here? These are bright and climbing. Negative, Mike Romeo. You're clear. No weather balloons in that region tonight. No scheduled launches. Do you want to divert? I didn't answer that right away. I was still watching the lights. They had stopped rising now. Just hanging there, maybe 5,000 feet above me. Hard to say for sure. But too close to be stars. Too fixed to be helicopters. I banked slightly right to keep them in view. The second I did that, the whole group of lights shifted. Not toward me, not away, just sideways. The whole vertical column moved perfectly horizontal to the west, like it was sliding on glass. Still no change in spacing, no rotation, no blinking, just a slow, smooth drift. And then they stopped again. I keyed the mic. Salt Lake, I'm going to say again, I've got visual contact with 4 unidentified lights moving laterally. No strobes, no sound, no visible aircraft body. Are you positive I'm the only one out here? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, 785 Mike Romeo, we're painting only you in that airspace. Do you wish to declare any kind of emergency? I didn't. I just said no and kept flying. The lights held their new position for about another minute. Then, and this is the part I can't explain, they began rising again, but much faster this time. Not accelerating, just a sudden jump in speed, like a new gear had kicked in. They moved straight up and disappeared into the cloudless sky within maybe 3 seconds. I don't mean they dimmed out or flickered. I mean they shot up and were gone. Nothing left, just empty night sky. I sat there staring at the spot for a long time. Center didn't say anything else. I think they were waiting to see if I'd call back, but I didn't. The rest of the flight was quiet. I landed just after 11:30. Wind calm, hangar dark, I didn't see anyone on the ground. I tied the plane down, climbed in my truck, and drove to the motel without unpacking. A few odd things happened the next morning. My watch was off by 10 minutes, behind, and it's a solar Casio, doesn't lose time. My backup headset mic was partially unplugged and tucked under the seat, and my kneeboard, which I always clip to my leg during flight, was on the passenger side floor. Nothing big, nothing impossible, but I remember checking the time before I saw the lights. I remember clipping the board to my knee. I remember coiling my headset cord like always. But something had shifted. I haven't mentioned it to anyone except one other pilot I trust. He didn't laugh, didn't try to explain it either. Just listened and nodded and said he's seen odd lights more than once in that same general area. I haven't flown that route again at night. I was 16 when this happened, and I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Not because I was scared of getting in trouble or anything like that, but because I honestly didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I was lying. Or crazy. Or both. It was early August, and I'd gone out for a solo hike. My dad used to take me camping a lot when I was younger, so I was pretty comfortable being out in the woods alone. I wasn't that far from home, but maybe 5 miles north of the old fire road that cuts behind our neighborhood. There's this little clearing off a side trail, maybe 10 minutes off the main path, and I'd been there before a couple times. I liked it because no one else ever seemed to go that way, probably too overgrown for most people. That day I left around noon with a small pack, just some water, a snack, flashlight, and my phone. I wasn't planning to stay the night or anything. Just wanted to get out and be by myself for a while. The hike-in was totally normal. Hot, quiet, buggy. I didn't see a single other person after I passed the trailhead. I got to the clearing a little after 2 p.m. I remember because I checked my phone to make sure I had enough daylight left before heading back. I ate a granola bar, lay down in the grass, and must have dozed off. It wasn't planned, just that kind of thick summer heat where your body slows down and you shut your eyes for a second. When I woke up, it was darker than it should have been. Not night, but dusky. Sky was gray, a little overcast, and I remember thinking it felt later than it was. I checked my phone, 5:41 p.m., and realized I'd been out cold for almost 4 hours. That didn't make sense. I'd never slept that long on the ground before. What was weirder, though, was how quiet it was. The clearing is usually full of birds and crickets, wind in the trees, background noise. But when I sat up, it was totally still. No wind, no bugs. Even the trees weren't moving. I stood up and stretched, a little disoriented, and that's when I noticed my pack had been unzipped. Not wide open, just slightly. Like someone had started to open it and stopped. I thought maybe I hadn't closed it all the way, but I always double-check that stuff. My flashlight had been taken out and placed next to the bag. Not far, just set down like someone meant to borrow it and then change their mind. I picked it up and turned it on. It worked fine. Nothing was missing from the pack. Water bottle was still there. My phone was in my pocket the whole time. That kind of set me on edge. I started scanning the tree line, checking for movement, didn't see anything, but the feeling that someone had been near me was strong enough that I backed up toward the center of the clearing without even thinking about it. I didn't hear anything, didn't see any prints, but I had this feeling in my chest, like I wasn't alone. I decided to head back right then. It was going to get dark soon, and I didn't want to be out there in the woods if someone else was messing around. I moved fast, barely stopped for anything. The woods stayed quiet the whole way back to the trailhead. No animal sounds, no hikers, no breeze. It wasn't until I got back to the fire road that the noise came back. Cicadas, birds, all of it, like someone had flipped a switch. I got home just after 7. My mom asked if I had fun and said I looked like I'd gotten some sun. I told her it was a normal hike. I didn't feel like talking about the weird stuff, mostly because I didn't know what to say. It wasn't until later that night that I found the video. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my photos to delete some old ones, and I noticed a video thumbnail I didn't recognize. It didn't have a timestamp next to it. Just the first frame, dark, grainy, with a faint outline of trees. I tapped it. It was about 12 seconds long. Shaky, like whoever was holding the phone didn't know they were recording or was trying to be discreet. It showed me. Sleeping. In the clearing. I was lying on my side with my arms curled up under my head, exactly how I remember waking up. The video was taken from the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, just far enough that the grass muffled the sound, but I could still hear it. Breathing. Slow, uneven breaths. Not mine. The angle didn't move. Whoever was holding the phone was crouched or low to the ground. The shot stayed fixed on me, zoomed in slightly, then cut out. No sound at the end, no movement. Just cut to black. I stared at it for probably 5 straight minutes. Checked the info. No date, no time, no GPS tag. Just listed under videos with a file number that didn't match any of the others. It shouldn't have been there. I checked the rest of my phone. Nothing else had changed. No weird files, no deleted apps, no signs of tampering. But the video was real. I watched it again, this time with the volume up. The breathing was there, soft, slow, but definitely human, or at least close to it. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept getting up to check my window, check my closet, make sure my phone was still where I left it. I didn't show it to anyone. I thought about deleting it, but I couldn't bring myself to. The next morning, I went through my backpack again, carefully this time. Everything was where it should be. No dirt, no scratches, no signs of forced entry. The flashlight still worked. The zipper wasn't damaged. But the video hadn't just appeared by accident. I don't use cloud backups or anything like that. No one else has access to my phone. It's never left my side. And even if someone had snuck up and taken it while I was asleep, they would have had to unlock it, record the video, save it, and relock the phone without waking me. All within a few feet of my head. And that doesn't explain the breathing. I stopped going to that clearing after that. I kept hiking, just stuck to open trails where I could see other people. Every once in a while I'd get the feeling that someone was behind me, not close but not far either. Just far enough to stay out of sight. I never found any other videos. That one disappeared a few months later. I didn't delete it. It was just gone one day. I checked every folder, ran a search, plugged it into my laptop, nothing. It's like it deleted itself. But I remember it. I remember the way I looked lying there. The way the trees moved behind me, just barely. The way the breathing sped up slightly just before the video ended, like whatever was filming me was getting closer. We were out by Silver Lake, just outside of Prescott, Arizona. It was one of those nights where the air cools down enough after a hot day that you don't mind sitting outside long after sunset. The sky was clear, no moon, just stars. You could see every constellation, crisp and sharp. Me, my buddy Nate, and 2 others from our hiking group, Jen and Carlos, decided to drive out there after dinner. We'd been talking about doing some stargazing for a while. It wasn't far, maybe a 20-minute drive from town, and the lake's pretty quiet at night, except for the occasional fisherman or camper. We got there around 9 p.m. The parking lot was nearly empty. We grabbed some blankets, lawn chairs, and a couple of beers and headed down to the water's edge. The lake's kind of like a natural mirror when the air's still, and tonight was perfect for that. At first, we just lay back looking up, pointing out Orion, the Big Dipper, random stuff like that. The usual stargazing chat, you know? It was peaceful. The only sounds were crickets and the soft lapping of water against the rocks. After a while, Jen, who's always got this habit of staring down at the water, nudged me and said, "Hey, look at that." She was pointing at the lake's surface where, just a little way out, a soft, steady light was reflecting. It wasn't like a flashlight or anything we brought. It was this gentle glow, kind of pale blue, flickering in place near the middle of the lake. I looked up to see if I could catch whatever was casting it, but the sky above was clear, empty. No airplanes, no drones, no boats, nothing. Carlos shrugged. Maybe a fishing boat? We all looked around, but the shore opposite us was empty. No lights, no movement. The water was flat, no wakes or ripples beyond the usual. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a reflection from the campground across the lake. But that area was dark, and the campground had been closed since early spring. We sat quietly, eyes shifting between the water and the sky. The light stayed steady. It didn't move, didn't get brighter or dimmer, just hung there in the water like it was something solid under the surface. Nate got out his phone and tried to zoom in, but the light was too far and kind of fuzzy. When he put the phone down, the reflection was still there. Then something odd happened. Jen said, "Look." The reflection shifted, not smoothly, but in a sort of jittery way, like it jumped a few feet to the right, then back. It wasn't waves or wind. The water was perfectly still, except for tiny ripples near the shore. We all leaned forward, watching. The light blinked off for a second, and when it came back on, it was maybe twice as bright, then it dimmed again. None of us said much. There was this weird tension, like we were waiting for something, but we didn't know what. Suddenly, the light vanished completely. Just gone. No flicker, no fade, nothing. We all glanced up. The sky was still empty. Not a single star blinked out or changed. Did it just disappear? Carlos asked quietly. Yeah, I said, but honestly, I wasn't sure what to make of it. We stayed by the lake for an hour more, watching for any sign of the light, but it never came back. The night was calm, nothing else out of the ordinary. On the drive home, we tried to talk about it like it was no big deal, but nobody really believed that. The next day, I checked out online forums for Prescott. Local weather reports, any notices about the lake, drone activity, military exercises nearby, nothing. No reports of strange lights, no warnings. Jen mentioned that a friend of hers, who's a park ranger in a nearby forest, once told her about will-o'-the-wisp stuff. Old tales about lights in the marshes, but she didn't really believe in that kind of thing. Neither did I. What bugs me most is that it was only in the water. If it had been something flying or floating above, we would have seen it in the sky. But we didn't. Just the reflection, no source. It's like something was there, just beneath the surface, but whatever it was, it didn't want us to see it directly. I keep replaying that night in my head, trying to figure it out. Maybe we imagined it, but 4 people saw it. I don't think we'd all hallucinate the same thing. I still go out near Silver Lake sometimes, hoping to catch it again, but the lake's been quiet since. No strange lights, no reflections, nothing. Still, every now and then, when the air is dead calm and the stars are out, I'll look down at the water, half expecting to see that pale blue glow flickering just beneath the surface. The night I was driving home from work, something happened that I still can't really explain. I was coming back from my usual night shift at the hospital in Spokane. It was late, almost 2 a.m., and the roads were mostly empty. The sky was clear, cold, the kind of early spring night where the air feels sharp, but still holds a little warmth from the day. I had my windows cracked just a bit to keep the car from feeling too stuffy, and the only thing filling the silence besides the engine was the faint hum of the radio, tuned low. About 20 minutes into the drive, somewhere out past the last stretch of streetlights before the highway gave way to the open fields, I saw it. A light in the sky, moving downwards slowly. At first, I thought it was a falling star, like the kind you see during meteor showers. But this one didn't fall the way a star usually does. It wasn't rushing or streaking across the sky. It just descended straight down, almost floating. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was seeing things, or maybe the city lights were messing with my eyes. But it was there, just hovering midair, maybe a few hundred feet above the ground. It didn't make a sound, not even the faintest buzz or crackle you'd expect from something moving through the atmosphere. I mean, it was dead silent. I slowed the car a little, watching it as it hung in place. The light wasn't bright like a spotlight or a street lamp. It was more like a soft glow, maybe yellowish or amber, but steady. It didn't flicker or move around much. I tried to see if I could figure out its shape, but it was too far away, just a bright blur. Then, just as slowly as it came down, it suddenly shot straight back up into the sky. Faster than anything I'd seen before, like a bullet, but again, without a sound. It disappeared into the dark night above the trees. I kept driving, but my heart was pounding. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with this strange kind of tension. I looked in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me, maybe someone else who saw the same thing, but the road was empty. When I got home, I told my roommate Sarah about it. She laughed and said it was probably just a satellite or a drone. But I know what I saw. Drones don't move like that, especially not that high or that quietly. The next few nights, I kept glancing up while driving, hoping to catch it again or see something similar. Nothing. The sky was normal, the stars were normal, and traffic was just as sparse as usual. But that night, for some reason, everything felt different. I noticed other small things that didn't quite add up in the following days. My phone started glitching out. Calls dropped, the screen flickered randomly. My clock radio reset itself several times, always around 2 a.m. Even the lights in my apartment would dim briefly, like a quick power fluctuation, but the building's main power never went out. I tried to shrug it off at first. I'm not one to get spooked easily, but the more I thought about that light, the more uneasy I felt. The way it moved, the silence. There was no obvious explanation, no planes nearby, no satellites showing up on any of the tracking apps I checked. Just that slow fall, the hover, then the sudden climb back up. I thought maybe I was tired, overworked, just imagining things after a long shift. But the moment stuck with me. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night now, I find myself glancing up, scanning the sky, half expecting to see it again. But it hasn't come back. I don't know what it was. A trick of the light? Some kind of atmospheric phenomenon? Or something else, something I don't understand? All I know is, that night on the road, I saw something that moved too deliberately, too silently, to be a falling star. And it stopped in the air long enough for me to see it wasn't like anything I've seen before. I was driving back home from Denver to Boise, just trying to get through the long haul in one go. It was late October, so the nights were chilly and the roads pretty empty. I had been behind the wheel for maybe 10 hours straight, and around midnight, somewhere near Twin Falls, Idaho, I started feeling it. The kind of exhaustion that just sneaks up and messes with your focus. So I figured I'd pull off at this small rest stop just off the highway to catch a few hours of sleep before finishing the drive in the morning. The rest stop was one of those bare bones places, just a gravel lot, a single porta potty, and some picnic tables under a couple of skeletal trees. I parked my old sedan facing the highway, shut the engine off, and leaned the seat back. I set my phone alarm for 5 a.m., thinking 5 hours would be enough to get me refreshed. When I woke up, I had this odd, heavy feeling, like I'd slept, but not really rested. It was still dark outside, but just barely. The sky had a faint glow from the coming dawn. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It read 5:10 a.m., right about when I expected to be waking up. That's when I noticed the gas gauge. It was sitting dead on empty. That couldn't be right. I'd filled up at a station maybe 50 miles back, and I was careful with gas. My car wasn't a gas guzzler, and the tank was half full when I pulled over. How could it be empty now? I glanced at the odometer. The mileage read 202,354. I swear to myself, I had 202,351 when I parked. 2.3 miles had been added. I frowned and rubbed my eyes, sitting up straighter. There was no way I'd driven any distance while asleep, and the car hadn't moved from where I left it. The gravel was still intact under the tires, no tracks or signs I'd rolled forward or backward. I stepped out to look around, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The rest stop was still mostly dark except for the faint amber glow from the highway lights. I looked down the highway in both directions. No cars had stopped or passed in the last few hours. Too quiet. Even the wind was calm. I glanced at the gas cap again. It was tightly sealed, no leaks or damage. The smell of gasoline was faint but definitely there, like something had drained the tank. I went back inside the car, grabbed my phone, and tried calling my wife Sarah. No signal. That was weird too. This stretch of highway usually had at least some bars. I figured the area's just a dead zone though. I decided to check the Maps app, thinking maybe I'd accidentally driven somewhere and lost time. But the map was stuck on my location, which matched the rest stop exactly. I was starting to get that sinking feeling like something was off beyond just the gas. I tried to remember what I was dreaming about before I woke up, but my mind was fuzzy. It was like a blank patch with only fragments. A soft blue light, quiet whispers I couldn't make out, and this overwhelming sense of being watched. I shook my head, probably just tired. Maybe I dozed off for a while and someone drained my gas, or maybe there was a leak I hadn't noticed. Still, the mileage difference was the thing that stuck with me. I stayed at the rest stop, thinking about what to do next. It was too early to try calling a tow or roadside service, and with no cell signal, that wasn't an option anyway. I figured I'd wait a bit, see if anyone else came along. That's when I noticed the sounds. Not the usual hum of the highway or the occasional wind through the trees, but something else. Very faint and distant, like a low vibration under the earth. It wasn't constant. It would pulse for a few seconds, then fade away. I tried to pinpoint where it was coming from, but it felt like it was everywhere at once. It didn't make any sense. The ground near the rest stop felt solid. No construction or trains or anything that might explain it. I sat in my car watching the dim horizon, and the strange feeling of unease started to build. I wasn't scared exactly, more like confused, like I was missing some key detail. After maybe 20 minutes, I thought I saw something moving in the distance. A small flicker of light near the trees lining the highway. It wasn't a car, no headlights or taillights, just a quick flash of pale white like a lantern or a flashlight, but it didn't move like a person walking. I got out of the car and walked toward the edge of the lot to get a better look. The light flickered again, this time closer, but still not quite visible, like it was behind a screen or mist. When I focused on it, the light vanished. I turned back toward the car, feeling the cold seep deeper into my jacket. The vibration under the ground was stronger now, a steady pulse, almost like a heartbeat. I put my hand on the hood of the car, and the metal seemed to hum with it. I decided to try the engine to see if it would start. The car fired up, but the gas gauge still read empty. The engine sounded a little rough, like it was struggling. I gave the throttle a few revs, and the sound echoed off the empty rest stop. I sat back and looked around again. The light never came back. The vibration faded slowly until it was gone altogether. I drove off the rest stop, taking it slow. The car seemed fine except for the fuel reading. I figured I'd find a gas station soon and fill up. But when I pulled over at the first station, I checked the odometer again. The mileage had ticked up another 2 miles since I left the rest stop, even though I hadn't driven that far. And the gas tank still read empty. The gas pump struggled to fill. It took nearly 10 gallons to top off a tank I was sure was at least half full when I pulled over earlier. I paid, got back in the car, and kept going. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. No strange lights, no vibrations. My phone got signal again once I hit town. When I told Sarah about it later, she just raised her eyebrows. I didn't expect her to believe the part about the mileage or the empty tank. I didn't really believe it myself. I've thought a lot about what happened, especially that weird vibration and the light flickering near the trees. I'm not sure if it was something mechanical, some glitch with the car, or something else. The only thing I'm certain of is that I woke up feeling like I'd slept for hours in one place. But my car had apparently gone somewhere else, at least a couple of miles, without me moving it. And the gas tank was empty when it shouldn't have been. Whatever it was, it left no sign except that little patch of empty gravel and an odometer that didn't add up. I'd been messing around with my ham radio setup one late Saturday night, just trying to get a better handle on the whole thing. My name's Mark, and I live out near Flagstaff, Arizona, which, for the record, is one of those spots where the sky is so dark at night it feels like space is right on top of you. Perfect for radio and stargazing, but also, as I'd learned, for some weird stuff you can't quite explain. I just finished dinner and was sitting at my workbench in the garage. The radio gear is all pretty old school, nothing fancy, mostly stuff I pieced together over the years, antennas I built myself, and a couple of receivers. I'm not a pro by any means, just a guy who likes the quiet and the challenge of picking up signals. I usually listen to weather stations or chat with folks in nearby states, but that night I decided to try scanning some of the higher frequencies, the kind that don't get a lot of traffic. After tuning for maybe an hour, I caught something strange. It wasn't a normal signal like Morse code or any of the standard digital transmissions I'm used to. Instead, it was a rhythmic pulse, steady, almost like a heartbeat, but mechanical and deliberate. Not random static or interference either. It repeated in a pattern that was close to Morse code, but off enough that I couldn't make sense of it. I leaned closer, adjusting the squelch and fine-tuning the receiver. The pulses kept coming, steady and persistent. I grabbed my logbook and started noting the times and signal strength. Something about it felt oddly deliberate, like it was trying to communicate but not in any language I recognized. I decided to figure out where it was coming from. Using the directional antenna I'd built, I began a slow sweep, turning it in small increments and watching the signal strength meter. The pulse got stronger as I turned the antenna toward the southern sky, then southwest, then straight up. That's when I stopped and sat back. The strongest signal wasn't coming from any terrestrial source, it was coming from directly overhead. I repeated the sweep a few times, triple-checking my setup. Same result every time. The pulses were strongest when my antenna pointed straight up, as if the signal was coming from something above the atmosphere. That didn't make sense. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories about signals from space, but nothing that came through on my kind of equipment like this. I even tried changing bands and frequencies, but the pulse was only on one particular frequency, one I hadn't seen used before. I called my buddy Jerry. He's a fellow ham operator, lives a few miles down the road. Told him what I was hearing and what I'd found. He was skeptical, said it was probably interference from a satellite or some weather balloon. But neither of us could explain why the pulse was so rhythmic or why it wasn't any familiar code. We agreed to meet the next night with our gear and try to pinpoint it together. That evening, the sky was clear, crisp, with a light wind that made the desert scrub rustle softly. Jerry showed up with his setup, a more powerful receiver and a notebook filled with charts and frequencies. We set up on my back patio, away from the house lights. We tuned in. The pulses were there, as steady as ever. Jerry aimed his antenna upward and the signal peaked. I adjusted mine to the same angle, and we both confirmed it was strongest directly above us. Jerry joked about aliens, but his usual smirk wasn't quite there. There was a weird silence between us, like the night was holding its breath. After a while, I noticed something else. The pulses weren't perfectly consistent. They'd speed up and slow down slightly, like a breathing rhythm. It wasn't just mechanical, it felt organic. We spent hours tracking it, and during that time I kept glancing at the sky. No aircraft, no satellites in sight, no flashing lights or anything moving. Then around 2 a.m. something shifted. The pulses faded, then stopped entirely. I looked up and I swear the stars seemed brighter, sharper, but something was off. The air felt thicker. There was a low hum, almost too quiet to notice, but it was definitely there. Jerry got up and stretched. He said maybe the source moved on or the signal stopped for a break. I wasn't so sure. As we packed up, I saw a faint glow near the horizon, pale and bluish, hovering low above the distant mountains. It wasn't a plane or a weather balloon. It was too steady and low, like a spotlight from some invisible machine. We didn't say anything about it at first. Jerry just nodded and said maybe it was a power station or a flare. I wasn't convinced. That night, I couldn't sleep. The signal, the glow, the hum, it all kept cycling in my head. I kept wondering if I'd heard something not meant for me, or if something was watching us through the radio waves. Over the next few days, I tried listening again. The pulses never came back. The sky was normal. The glow didn't show up again. I checked all the usual sources: local airports, government stations, space agency updates. Nothing matched what I'd heard or seen. Sometimes when the night is quiet and I'm alone in the garage with my radio gear, I catch myself staring at the antenna pointed at the sky, waiting for the pulse to return. And it hasn't, but I still wonder what was up there that night, making those strange rhythms just for a little while, high above my head, out of reach. I was out in the field behind my house one late Sunday afternoon in early October, flying my drone. It's something I'd gotten into about 6 months before, just a hobby to clear my head after work. My name's Jake, by the way. I live in a quiet suburb outside of Boise, Idaho, surrounded by open fields and patches of woods, so it's a pretty good spot for flying. Not too many people, and plenty of space to maneuver without bothering anyone. That day, the sky was mostly clear with some scattered clouds, and a light breeze was coming in from the west. Perfect flying weather. I'd taken my usual route, just flying straight up, then out over the field, doing some slow circles and taking pictures of the landscape. I had my tablet with me, the live feed showing exactly what the drone's camera saw. At some point, I decided to try going higher, near the legal altitude limit of 400 feet. The drone's app warns you when you're getting close to that cap, and it won't let you go any higher. So I took it up, watching the trees get smaller and the roads look like lines on a map. It's weird how peaceful it feels up there, away from everything. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of flying, I started bringing the drone back in. As I was reviewing the live feed on my tablet, I noticed something odd. There was this dark shape moving alongside the drone, sort of hovering nearby, matching its speed and direction. At first, I thought it might be a bird, but it didn't flap wings or make any noise, and the shape was too vague, almost like a shadow. I stopped the drone's movement to get a better look. The shadow stayed there, just floating next to the drone. I tried moving the drone left and right, but the shadow shifted with it. It wasn't something on the lens or a glitch. The shadow had a definite shape, almost like a rounded, uneven silhouette. It reminded me of one of those big bats I'd seen in documentaries, but we don't have bats that big around here. I started to feel a little uneasy. The drone's altitude showed 390 feet, just under the limit. No way anything that big was up that high, at least not anything I knew about. I thought maybe a cloud or some atmospheric effect was messing with the camera, so I zoomed out a bit and tilted the camera angle down to see if anything on the ground might be casting a strange shadow, but everything looked normal. Just the open field, some distant houses, and the highway. I decided to land the drone, but as I brought it in, the shadow didn't move closer or away. It stayed right beside the drone, as if it was following it precisely. When the drone touched down, the shadow vanished instantly. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen, wondering if I'd imagined it or if it was some sort of interference. Later that evening, after dinner, I downloaded the footage to my laptop to look at it more closely. On the original video files, the shadow was there the whole time the drone was at high altitude. I watched frame by frame, and it wasn't a lens flare or an artifact. It had depth, a shape, and even seemed to block some of the sunlight, casting a faint shadow on the drone's camera feed. The next day, I took the drone back out, trying to recreate the conditions. Same field, same time of day, same altitude. I flew the drone up again, watching carefully for the shadow. Nothing appeared. I flew the drone a bit longer, over the woods this time, and still no sign of anything strange. I asked my friend Miguel, who's a drone enthusiast too, to check the footage with me. He's pretty tech-savvy and familiar with glitches and camera problems. We looked at the video on his computer, slowed it down, enhanced contrast and brightness. The shadow was still there, clear and moving with the drone. He agreed it wasn't a typical glitch. Miguel joked, "Maybe you found yourself a UFO shadow." I laughed it off, but honestly, I didn't know what else to say. After that, I kept an eye on the skies for a few nights from my backyard, just looking up at the stars, hoping maybe I'd see something else. Nothing. Just the usual planes, satellites, and an occasional meteor. But every time I watch that footage, the image of that dark shape beside my drone sticks with me. Something was up there that day. Something following or shadowing the drone at an altitude where no bird or regular object should be. I don't fly the drone quite as high anymore, not because I'm scared, but because I don't want to see that shadow again. I'm still not sure what it was, and part of me hopes I never do. I was camping alone near Rachel, Nevada back in 2017. I'd retired the year before, did 32 years in aerospace, mostly systems design, and decided to take a little solo road trip through some old haunts. Not because of the base. I couldn't have cared less about the conspiracy stuff, but I used to pass through the area for work in the 90s, and I'd always liked the stillness out there. Real quiet at night, real dark. I parked my camper van about a mile off the extraterrestrial highway. BLM land. No lights, no fences. Just me and my mutt, Arlo. He's some kind of shepherd mix, but small. Sleeps most of the day. Back then he was 7, still had good hearing. That night, it was around 9:30. I'd already had dinner and was sitting in one of those fold-out chairs, just sipping tea and listening to the breeze cut through the creosote. Cold but clear. No clouds. Just a wide-open sky full of stars. The kind of night where you forget how many of them there really are. Arlo was laying by the van, his chin on his paws, not asleep but not alert either. I remember looking up and thinking something seemed a little off, though I couldn't say what at first. You know how when you're looking at stars for a while, they almost start to move in your peripheral vision, like your eyes play tricks? That's what I chalked it up to, but it got weirder. The stars directly overhead weren't twinkling like the rest. They weren't steady either, they were flickering. Not all of them, just a patch maybe the size of a dinner plate if you held it at arm's length, a tight little cluster. And they weren't random either. The flickering was patterned, like 3 would blink off, then back on, and then the 4 around them would do it next, in this rotating rhythm. Over and over, like some kind of sequence. I stood up, took a few steps away from the van, just to make sure I wasn't seeing a reflection from a window or something. Nope, still there. I even wiped my glasses, though they weren't dirty. The flickering went on for maybe 2 full minutes. I counted 27 cycles before it stopped. Then the stars in that patch just snapped back to normal. Twinkling like all the others, like nothing had happened. I looked over at Arlo. He was standing now, ears up, looking in the same direction. Not barking, just watching. His tail was low, not wagging. About 30 seconds later, I heard something strange. It was faint, but it wasn't natural. Not wind, not an animal. It was this low mechanical whine, like the sound you hear when a CRT TV is on, but deeper. Almost subsonic. It didn't come from one direction either. It felt like it was all around me. Then I saw movement, not in the sky, on the ground, out past where the scrub gets thin. Something passed between me and the horizon. No shape, just a distortion, like heat waves but colder somehow. The air shimmered in this slow, deliberate arc and then vanished. I didn't move, I just stood there, holding my breath. Arlo hadn't made a sound, but his entire body was rigid. Then the sound stopped, and everything felt too quiet. The wind had died completely. No insects, no distant car engines from the highway. It was like someone hit mute on the world. That's when I noticed the shadows. My van, the chair, even Arlo, our shadows were wrong. I had one long shadow stretching west, which made sense with the moon low behind me. But there was a second shadow, faint, going the opposite way, as if something behind that patch of sky had cast its own light. I looked up again. That same cluster of stars had gone dark. Not flickering this time, just gone, like someone had cut a hole in the sky. A perfect oval. You couldn't see anything through it. No stars, no clouds, just nothing. It didn't move, but I felt like it was moving, or rather it was watching. Not looking, but watching. I can't explain the difference, but I felt it in my gut. I backed up slowly toward the van. Arlo followed, still silent. I didn't take my eyes off that blank spot. I fumbled for the handle and opened the door. We both climbed inside. I didn't turn the lights on, just sat in the dark, heart thudding, trying to listen. About 10 minutes later, I peeked through the windshield. The oval was gone. Stars were back, twinkling like always. But then I saw something else. A faint line of light just above the ridgeline to the north. Horizontal. Pale blue, almost white. It hovered there for maybe 30 seconds, then dropped straight down behind the hills. No arc, just a perfectly vertical descent like it was on rails. I stayed in the van the rest of the night. Didn't sleep. Arlo lay beside me the whole time, ears up, head on my thigh. Every once in a while, he'd look toward the window and growl low in his throat. Nothing loud, just a warning. By sunrise, it was like nothing had happened. Birds were chirping. The breeze was back. It was almost enough to make me think I'd imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I worked on satellites for years. I've built systems that track objects moving through low Earth orbit with accuracy down to centimeters. I know how light behaves. I know how shadows work. I know how stars twinkle. That wasn't a satellite. That wasn't a plane. And those stars didn't blink. They were blocked, like something massive moved through them. Something with edges, something big enough to leave a hole. I was out walking my dog, a mutt named Pippa, on a trail behind our house in the outskirts of Asheville. It was late afternoon, early fall, and the air was crisp but not cold. The trees were just starting to turn gold and red, the kind of colors that make you think winter's close but not quite there yet. The trail is mostly quiet, except for the occasional bird or squirrel, and Pippa loves sniffing around all the fallen leaves. That day, I left my phone in my pocket because I didn't want to be distracted. I figured I'd just enjoy the walk, maybe clear my head after a long week at the bookstore where I work. Pippa was restless and tugging a little more than usual, so I let her off leash for a bit. The trail curves through a patch of dense trees, and that's when I noticed something odd. About 50 feet ahead, above the treetops, there was this large object hovering. It wasn't making any noise. No hum, no wind, nothing. It looked like a drone but way bigger, maybe 10 feet across, with a flat, oval shape. The surface was matte and dark, no blinking lights or markings. I stopped walking and stared, heart pounding a bit. I don't know much about drones, but this didn't look like any commercial or military drone I've ever seen. I reached into my pocket to get my phone and snap a picture. The second I pulled it out, the screen went black. No warning, no freeze, just dead. I tried pressing the power button, holding it down, plugging it into the portable charger I had with me. Nothing. It was like the phone had completely shut off and refused to turn back on. I looked back at the craft. It hadn't moved. It was just there, hovering, like it was watching. I felt my skin go tight, like something was crawling under it, but I shook it off and tried to focus. Maybe it was some weird weather balloon or a new kind of drone that wasn't supposed to be public yet. After a few minutes, I decided to turn around and head back toward the trailhead. I wasn't sure what to do, but I felt uneasy just standing there. Pippa was calm, which helped a little. She wagged her tail and looked up at me like she was waiting for me to make a move. As I walked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The object stayed put, no lights, no sounds, nothing that suggested it was about to leave. When I got close enough to the clearing where my car was parked, I tried turning my phone on again. Still nothing. I got home around 6:30, and by then the sun was setting fast. I sat down at the kitchen table and took the phone apart a bit, hoping it was just a glitch. No water damage, no cracked screen. It felt normal in my hand, but the screen wouldn't light up. I left it plugged in overnight just in case. The next morning, it still wouldn't turn on. I called my friend Leah, who's a bit of a tech whiz, and she told me to bring it over. She tried everything, hard resets, software restores, even hooking it up to her computer. Nothing. The phone was completely dead. That day, I kept thinking about the drone. I looked online for news or any reports of unusual drone sightings near Asheville. There was nothing. No police reports, no local news, no chatter on any forums. After about an hour, something weird happened. I was sitting on my couch staring at the dead phone on the coffee table when the screen suddenly flickered on by itself. It took a minute to fully boot, and when it did, it was like nothing had happened. All my apps, photos, messages, they were all there, exactly as I left them. I thought maybe it had just been a battery issue, but the timing felt too strange. The days after that, Pippa started acting jittery whenever we went near the trail. She would freeze and stare at the trees, hackles raised, low growling that I hadn't heard before. Once, she even refused to go onto the trail at all. I went back out there a couple times to see if the craft was still around, but there was no sign of it. No strange lights, no unusual sounds, just the normal forest noises. The weirdest part is that since then, my phone has had random glitches. Sometimes the camera app crashes the moment I open it. Other times the flashlight turns on by itself for no reason. Nothing that serious, but enough to keep me on edge. I don't know what I saw that day, or why my phone died the way it did. I don't even know if it was something from this world. All I know is that quiet afternoon on the trail doesn't add up, and whatever that thing was, it wasn't interested in being found, just watching. I never thought much about talking about this. Hell, I kept it to myself for years. But it's been sitting with me, nagging at the edges, so here it goes. I'm Ed Harrow. I'm 68 now, retired radar operator, spent most of my career at a military base in Montana, watching the skies for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing fancy, just radar screens, dials, and long shifts staring at green blips. One night, back in '94, I was on the graveyard shift, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m., working alone in the radar room. The base was mostly quiet, just the usual static and some birds or planes passing through. Nothing that ever gave me a second thought. But then something came up that didn't make sense. Around 5:15 a.m., I noticed a blip on the radar far below the altitude range we usually track. I was used to seeing planes between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, commercial jets, military patrols, sometimes satellites when the gear was tuned right. This blip was at about 1,000 feet, hovering in the middle of nowhere. I figured it was a small aircraft or maybe a weather balloon. I kept watching it, expecting it to move or disappear. It didn't. Then, in less than 3 seconds, it rocketed straight up like a bullet, no curve, no slowing, past 70,000 feet. The thing vanished off the screen right around the edge of the radar's maximum range. I sat back, blinking. My heart was pounding. Nothing I'd ever seen moved like that. I tried to get a second opinion, but I was alone. I double-checked the equipment. Nothing wrong, no glitches. I logged the event in the usual way, then reported it up the chain. What happened next was what really made it strange. My supervisor called me in, calm but serious. He told me that I wasn't to mention the incident again. Not to anyone. No reports beyond the official logs. No questions. I asked why. He said it was classified and beyond my clearance. That was the first time I realized how little I knew about what was really going on. I kept the memory tucked away, didn't talk about it with my family or coworkers. You learn quick not to rock the boat in that line of work. But the weirdness didn't stop that night. About an hour later, I was outside for a smoke break. The sky was still dark, but starting to show hints of dawn. I noticed something odd, an almost imperceptible hum in the air, like a low-frequency vibration. It wasn't from the base or any machines. It felt unnatural. Then I saw a faint glow on the horizon, just above the tree line. It wasn't a star or an aircraft light. It was this pale, steady light, neither blinking nor moving fast. I watched it for a while. It didn't get brighter or dimmer, just stayed there, glowing softly. I tried to call the radar room, thinking maybe there was something new on the screens. The radio crackled, but no one answered. I went back inside. The radar showed nothing unusual. I shrugged it off as nerves, but the feeling lingered. Over the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of strange lights. Sometimes hovering near the base, sometimes just off in the distance. They didn't move like planes. No sound. Just there. Sometimes I'd hear the hum again, low and steady. I mentioned it once to a colleague. He laughed and said I'd been watching too many sci-fi movies. Then one night, I woke up suddenly. It was about 3 a.m., and the room was flooded with this dim bluish light. I looked out the window and saw a shape hovering just above the trees near the base. It wasn't like anything I could describe. A shape, maybe triangular, but the edges blurred and shifting. I blinked, and it was gone. I wasn't sure if I'd really seen it or if it was a dream. I didn't tell anyone. Years later, now that I'm retired and out of that world, I'm still not sure what I saw. The radar blip that shot straight up, the glowing lights, the hum, maybe some kind of new aircraft or secret tech, maybe something else. I've kept it to myself for so long because there was never a good way to explain it, but it's there. I tracked it. I know what I saw. And that's all I have. It was the second morning of our trip, just after dawn. Me and Nate had gotten to the ridge around 5:30 before the sun really started to show. It was cold but not miserable, maybe mid-30s, and the woods were still damp from the frost overnight. We were hunting elk, but we hadn't seen much the day before, so we moved a little farther east toward the open timber. We weren't talking much, just walking slow, keeping an eye on the ground, looking for fresh sign. I remember the light filtering through the branches, that gray-blue color before it turns golden. I was about 20 feet behind Nate when I saw him stop suddenly. He held his hand out without turning, real slow, palm down. That was our usual signal to freeze. I stopped and looked past him, and about 30 yards out in a patch of brush just off a narrow trail was a deer. A doe. Nothing special about it, not the animal we were after, obviously, but something was weird right away. It was just standing there, one leg raised like it had paused mid-step. Not twitching, not flicking its ears, totally still. Its head was tilted slightly up, not looking at us, looking above us. Nate stayed frozen, and I didn't move either. We watched it for maybe 10 seconds, maybe more. It didn't blink. It didn't twitch, just stared straight up. Then I looked up too. At first I didn't see anything. The sky was mostly clear, a few wisps of cloud catching early sunlight. But right above the tree line, a little ways past where the deer was looking, there was this shape. It wasn't lit up or glowing or anything like that. It was just black, perfectly black, and not shaped like a bird or a plane or even a drone. It was more like a wedge, not sharp, not pointed, just this black triangle floating up there. Still, no movement, no sound, and it was low enough that if it had made noise, we would have heard it. No wind, no leaves rustling, just dead quiet. I remember thinking maybe it was some weird shadow or a weird cloud formation, but it didn't move. It didn't match anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't blending in either. It actually blocked the stars behind it. Like, if you looked at the patch of sky just to the left or right, you could see the stars clearly. But where this thing was, it was just void. I looked back at the deer. Still frozen. Same raised hoof. Still staring upward. Nate turned his head slightly and whispered, "You see that?" I nodded, but I don't think he saw me. Neither of us moved for a while. I started to notice this weird pressure in my ears, like altitude pressure, but we weren't anywhere near high enough for that. It didn't hurt, just felt like being underwater. It made me swallow a few times. Then the deer finally moved, all at once. It jerked its head back down, looked around like it'd just woken up, and bolted into the brush without even giving us a glance. That broke the moment somehow. Nate turned and gave me a look, like, "What the hell?" I looked back up. The shape was still there, but I think it had rotated slightly, like not spinning, just a very slow pivot, like the edge of it was turning away. Still no sound. We stood there for another minute, maybe two, long enough for the light to change a little. Then it just wasn't there anymore. I didn't see it move. I didn't see it shrink or fade. I blinked and it was just gone. The stars behind it were back. We stayed out a few more hours that morning, but we didn't see anything. No elk, no deer, no birds. Even the squirrels were quiet. I remember Nate remarking how still everything felt, like the forest was holding its breath. Back at camp, we didn't really talk about it. We both kind of danced around it, like neither of us wanted to be the one to bring it up directly. I think we both were hoping it would seem less weird if we ignored it. That night, we heard something walking near the edge of camp. It wasn't close, but it was heavy enough to hear the crunch of twigs. Probably a moose, we told ourselves. We didn't go check. The next morning, we packed up early. We'd originally planned to stay through Sunday, but we both kind of mutually decided we'd seen enough. Nate just said, "Let's try a different area next time." On the drive out, maybe an hour after leaving camp, we saw another deer standing by the side of the road. Another doe. It was facing the tree line, not looking at us, not eating. Just standing there, head slightly up, same posture. We passed it slow, didn't stop. Nate didn't say anything until we were another mile down the road. He just said, "It looked the same." And yeah, it did. I was out in this big, open field just outside town flying my drone. It was one of those late afternoons in early fall. The kind where the sun is low, but the air is still warm enough to be comfortable. I like flying my drone there because there's nothing tall around to mess with the signal, and the sky is usually clear enough for good footage. I had the drone up for about 20 minutes, just doing some slow, sweeping shots of the trees and the horizon. I was testing out a new camera angle, trying to get some cool aerial shots for a project I was working on. The wind was light, just enough to ruffle the tops of the grass, and everything was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the drone's motors. Then, out of nowhere, the screen on my controller flickered and went black. The drone lost signal. I figured it was just a brief glitch, maybe some interference or a weak spot in the signal range. I tried moving around, waving the controller, trying to reestablish contact. Nothing. The feed didn't come back. Usually when this happens, the drone's programmed to return to home, but this time, the controller was dead silent. No automatic return, no warning beep. I kept checking the screen for any sign of life, but it was just blank. I wasn't too far from the drone, maybe a couple hundred feet away, so I started walking toward the last known position, trying to spot it. The field was big, mostly grass, with a few patches of dirt and scattered wildflowers, but I kept my eyes on the sky just in case it was still up there somewhere. When I finally found it, it was sitting on the ground near the edge of the field, just past a small grove of trees. The drone looked fine physically, no broken parts or obvious damage, which made it even weirder that the signal had cut out completely. I grabbed the drone and went back to my truck. I plugged the SD card into my laptop to check the footage. At first, everything seemed normal, smooth, steady shots of the field and the treetops, like I'd been flying it. But then, about 2 minutes before the feed cut out, the camera pointed straight up toward the sky. The clouds had thickened a bit, mostly gray and moving slow across the late afternoon sky. That's when something caught my eye. A shape in the clouds, metallic looking, but it didn't look like any airplane or weather balloon I'd ever seen. It wasn't a solid object exactly. More like a dim, reflective blur, hanging just inside the cloud cover, but with defined edges, almost like a thin, flat panel or a piece of metal suspended in the air. It moved slowly, almost drifting, but then it shifted sharply, not a smooth turn, but like a quick, precise change in direction. The drone camera captured it for maybe 10 seconds, just long enough for me to get a clear look. Then the feed cut out, no static or glitch, just ended. I watched that footage over and over, trying to convince myself it was a trick of light or a cloud formation, but the movement was just too distinct. The way it changed direction wasn't natural for a cloud or a bird. After that, things got strange in real life too. The day after I lost signal, I went back to the field to fly again, hoping to find whatever caused the interference. But when I got there, the field was quiet in a way I didn't expect. The usual sounds, birds chirping, wind rustling through grass, were almost completely gone. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I set up the drone again and tried flying it. The controls felt sluggish, like there was some invisible resistance. The signal was weak too, and the screen flickered a few times, showing faint static. I gave up and started packing up when I noticed something on the edge of the field, near where I'd found the drone the day before. A pale, blue light, just hovering low over the grass. It wasn't bright, more like a soft glow, and it pulsed twice slowly. I stared at it, frozen for a minute, wondering if it was just a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of something off a distant window or a car's headlights far away. But no cars or houses were nearby. Then the light vanished, just disappeared like someone switched it off. After that, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was watching me. Every time I looked toward the sky, I felt like I was being tracked by something I couldn't see. I kept checking my phone for messages or calls, but it was like my phone wanted to be silent. No texts, no notifications. The nights after that were rough. I kept hearing strange sounds outside my window. A low humming or occasional tapping that I couldn't place. It never lasted long and was always just out of clear view. Eventually, I stopped flying the drone for a while. I needed time to figure out what I'd seen or if I was just imagining things. Weeks later, I went back to that field one more time. It was late afternoon again, the same time I'd lost the signal the first time. I set the drone up, looked around, and waited. Nothing happened. No weird lights, no buzzing, no interference. I flew the drone for half an hour, got good shots, and brought it home. But even now, I can't explain what was in those clouds or why my drone lost contact. And sometimes when I look up at a clear sky, I think I still catch a glimpse of something out of place. Something that moves differently than the wind or the birds. Something I don't understand. I was doing my usual rounds out near Coldwater Marsh, one of those places most people don't think twice about unless they're looking to fish or birdwatch. It's a quiet patch of wetlands about 20 miles northeast of the park headquarters, mostly dense reeds, muddy water, and the occasional dirt trail that snakes through the brush. I was alone that morning. My partner Kyle had the day off, and it was foggy, thick enough that I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. My job was mostly checking traps, making sure the boundaries were clear, and keeping an eye on poachers or lost hikers. The fog made everything feel slower, quieter, like the world had muted itself. I'd parked my truck on the dirt road near the marsh edge around 7:30 a.m. and had been walking the perimeter for a couple of hours. My dog, Luna, was with me, a big mutt with a brindle coat and way too much energy for early mornings. She'd been sniffing around like usual, poking her nose into every puddle and root she could find. Then, about halfway through the second loop, something caught my eye. Muddy prints, leading right off the trail and straight into the marsh grass. I knelt down to get a closer look. The footprints were definitely human in shape, 5 toes, a clear arch, but they were enormous, at least twice the size of a normal adult male's prints. I swear the sole was nearly a foot long. I called Luna back and stood up, brushing mud off my pants. The prints went in a line, spaced out evenly, like someone was walking slowly and deliberately. The thing was, they stopped abruptly about 15 feet into the marsh itself. No sign of disturbance beyond that point. No way through the thick reeds and soggy muck. It was like the person, or whatever it was, had just vanished. I took out my phone to snap some pictures, but fog was messing with the camera focus. The images were grainy and washed out. Still, I sent a couple to the park office for records with a quick note. I figured maybe it was some local fisherman or someone clumsy who'd wandered in, but the size of the prints threw me off. No one in this part of the county was that big, and the prints were fresh enough that they couldn't be from weeks ago. Luna started growling low in her throat, looking toward the marsh where the prints ended. I tried to ignore it and called her off, but she kept staring, stiff-legged and tense. I wanted to move on, tell myself it was just a weird anomaly. But something about the quiet there made my skin crawl. The fog seemed thicker near the marsh, like it was swallowing up sound and light. I stood still for a minute, and I swear I heard the faintest splash way off to my left, maybe 50 yards into the reeds. But when I looked, there was nothing. Just a still patch of water and waving grasses. I started walking back toward the truck, keeping Luna close. My boots sank into the mud with every step, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling eyes on me. Nothing visible, but that feeling stayed, like I wasn't alone. By the time I got back, the sun had burned off some of the fog, but the marsh still looked like a ghost town. The air smelled damp and heavy. I told Kyle about the footprints later, and he joked that maybe Bigfoot had taken a day off and wandered through. I laughed it off too, but deep down I wasn't sure what else to say. The next day, I went back with a small crew to look for more tracks or any other signs. We found nothing. The marsh was quiet. The water still, no prints or broken branches beyond what I'd seen. That night at home, Luna wouldn't stop pacing by the back door. She stared out into the dark like something was waiting there, just beyond the edge of the yard. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. No people, no animals. A few days later, I was going through the photos again, zooming in on the footprints. I noticed something weird I hadn't seen before, a faint second set of smaller prints inside the larger ones, almost like someone was stepping directly into those giant footprints. But when I looked closer, the smaller prints were off. The toes were too long and thin, like they belonged to something else entirely. I tried showing the pictures to some local wildlife experts and even the county sheriff, but no one had a good explanation. They said maybe an animal had messed with the prints or something, but none of it fit right. I stopped going near Coldwater Marsh for a while after that. The fog, the quiet, those prints all felt like pieces of something I couldn't put together. Last week, Luna started barking at the window again, the same tense, locked-on kind of bark. When I looked outside, there was nothing but the empty yard and a low mist rolling in. I swear, for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the trees. I don't know what I saw out there, or what made those prints in the mud, but whatever it wasn't human, and it didn't leave. I woke up that morning with a pounding headache and my nose dripping blood onto the pillow. At first, I thought maybe I'd hit my head in my sleep or something, but when I sat up and wiped at my face, I noticed something else. On my right shoulder, just where my shirt had been riding up, there were these weird reddish marks. They looked like burns, but not the usual kind, more like a pattern, like someone had pressed a stencil or a stamp against my skin. It was made up of a bunch of tiny triangles and lines, kind of like those old geometric puzzles you see in design books or tattoos, but I'd never seen anything like it on a person. I didn't remember anything strange before I went to bed. I'd fallen asleep like usual in my room with my dog Juno curled up at the foot of the bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. The night had been quiet, except maybe for some distant thunder, but I wasn't sure. I tried to stand but got lightheaded fast. The headache was sharp, and the blood from my nose kept coming in slow drips. I called out for my mom, who came in a few minutes later, clearly worried. "Where did you hit yourself?" she asked, pulling back my shirt to see the marks. "I didn't hit anything. I don't know what this is," I said, touching the strange pattern lightly. It felt warm, but not painful. It didn't look like a rash, and there was no swelling or blistering. She cleaned me up and took me to the urgent care clinic nearby. The doctor examined me thoroughly. Nosebleed, dehydration maybe, but nothing that explained the marks on my shoulder. They ran some scans and blood tests, but everything came back normal. No burns, no skin damage visible on the scans, nothing. That's what freaked me out the most. The pattern was right there on my skin, but the machines showed nothing. Like the marks were just on the surface, or maybe my skin was playing tricks. The doctor said it might be an allergic reaction or something minor that would go away, but the nosebleed combined with the marks didn't make much sense. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal at school, but all I could think about was that shoulder. By evening, the redness had started fading, and by the next morning, it was almost gone, like it never happened. I checked the mirror carefully, looking for any trace of the geometric shapes, but there was nothing, just my regular skin, pale from not sleeping well. At first I thought maybe it was some kind of weird allergic reaction to detergent or a bug bite, but no one else in the house was affected, and I hadn't changed anything recently. That night I kept Juno close, and whenever I looked at my shoulder, I felt this weird chill. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion. Like my body had done something strange while I wasn't paying attention. I started paying attention to little things after that. Like how sometimes when I was alone in my room, I'd hear soft tapping noises, like someone knocking lightly on the walls. But when I checked, no one was there. Or how my phone would occasionally glitch, freezing on strange static patterns for a few seconds before coming back to normal. At school, some kids made jokes about me having secret symbols, or alien tattoos, which made me roll my eyes, but inside I wondered if maybe they were onto something, or if I was just losing it. I told my parents, but they mostly chalked it up to stress. I had been having trouble sleeping and focusing lately, but that didn't explain the nosebleed or the marks. One night a week later, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when Juno suddenly jumped up. Ears perked, staring at the corner of my room near the window. The air felt colder there, like a draft, even though the window was shut tight. The lights flickered briefly, and then the tapping started again. I didn't see anything, but my skin crawled. I tried to shake it off as nerves and went back to sleep. The next morning, I noticed a faint scar in the shape of one of those triangles on my shoulder. It was barely visible, like a faint scratch. When I showed my mom, she didn't notice it at first, but when she looked closer, she got this worried look on her face. We went back to the doctor, who said the skin was healing normally, but still no explanation for the pattern or why it appeared in the first place. The whole thing stuck with me for months. The nosebleed never came back, and the scars faded completely after a few weeks, but the memories of that night, the marks, the tapping, the cold spot, felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Sometimes when I'm alone in my room and the light is just right, I swear I can feel that cold draft near the window again, and if I look closely, shadows seem to move just a little too fast in the corner of my vision. I don't know what it means or if anyone else has experienced something like this, but it changed how I see things. Sometimes the world hides things just beyond what we can explain, and maybe that's okay. That's all I've got. Just a nosebleed, some strange marks, and a few nights that felt off. I was on a red-eye flight from Seattle to Chicago, sitting in the window seat of row 22. The plane was cruising at about 35,000 feet, and the lights inside were dimmed for most of the trip. I wasn't really tired, so I kept my window shade open, mostly watching the clouds drift by in the night sky. The moon was just a thin crescent, so it wasn't bright, but there was enough light to see some texture in the clouds below. About 2 hours into the flight, I noticed something unusual just outside my window. At first, it was subtle, a small metallic-looking sphere hovering a short distance from the plane, maybe 100 feet or so away. It wasn't blinking or flashing any lights like a drone or another aircraft. It just hung there, perfectly still, reflecting the pale moonlight. I blinked a couple of times, convinced it was some kind of trick from the glass or the reflection of the plane's wing. But then the sphere shifted, moving parallel to the plane. It matched the plane's speed perfectly, which was weird because the plane was moving fast, around 550 miles per hour. I turned to the person next to me, a woman who looked half asleep, and pointed out the window. She barely glanced and said something about just a cloud or a bird, but I knew what I was seeing. The sphere stayed close, pacing alongside us for at least 5 minutes. It never got closer or farther away, just maintained that exact distance, like it was riding the slipstream or something. I couldn't see any wings or propulsion system, just that smooth metallic surface that looked almost mirror-like, but with no real reflection, more like a dull sheen. What struck me was how unnatural it looked. The clouds around it were ordinary, drifting in their usual patterns, but the sphere didn't cause any turbulence or change. No jet wash from the engines, like no shifts in air pressure or anything you'd expect with something moving through the air at that altitude. It just moved with the plane. After those few minutes, the sphere suddenly changed direction. It drifted upward a little, disappearing into the cloud layer. The clouds there were thicker, gray, and wispy. Once it vanished, I kept watching the same spot for a while, but it didn't come back or reappear anywhere else. For the rest of the flight, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The other passengers were quiet or asleep. The flight attendants kept doing their rounds, and the captain never said a word over the intercom. If I hadn't seen it myself, I might have convinced myself it was just my imagination or some optical illusion caused by the plane's lights and clouds. When we landed in Chicago, I looked for news or anything about strange sightings over the Midwest that night. Nothing. No reports, no odd radar activity, no other passengers mentioning anything. Back home, I told a couple of friends, and most just shrugged it off as a drone or a weather balloon. But this thing wasn't anything normal. No blinking lights, no sound, no movement that made sense. Sometimes when I'm on another flight and the cabin lights go down, I find myself watching the clouds out the window again, half expecting to see that sphere or something like it. But it's never there. Just the same empty sky, silent and vast. I don't know what it was, really. Just a quiet presence pacing alongside us, perfectly synchronized, and then gone. I was 16, and it was one of those rare warm nights in late October here in rural Vermont. Not quite cold yet, but crisp enough that my jacket felt right. I'd grabbed my binoculars, nothing fancy, just a hand-me-down from my dad, and headed out behind my house. The backyard opens onto a small clearing surrounded by thick woods, and it's about as dark as you can get without leaving town. I wasn't out there for any reason besides boredom and a little curiosity. I'd gotten into stargazing recently, just because it was quiet and felt like something to do other than scroll on my phone all night. I'd learned a few constellations, and I liked trying to spot the satellites or whatever they were. The sky was clear, and the stars were bright, but I mostly just liked looking at random spots and seeing what I could make out through the binoculars. My dog, a scrappy mutt named Juno, was with me. She usually stuck close but had a habit of wandering off and barking at nothing, which I figured was just the usual forest sounds. Anyway, I was looking up near Orion's belt when I noticed this bright white dot. Not a satellite, not blinking like an airplane, just steady. It looked like a star, but it was lower than the others, closer to the treetops in the distance. I focused the binoculars on it, adjusting for the shake in my hands. That's when things got weird. The white dot split into 2 points of light. They drifted apart slowly, maybe 2 or 3 degrees of separation, and then after a few seconds they started moving back toward each other until they merged again into a single point. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. It didn't flicker or change color. It was just like the star itself had decided to split in 2, then put itself back together. I lowered the binoculars and blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. Juno looked up from sniffing some leaves, her ears perked like she sensed something off too. The backyard was quiet except for the usual rustling in the woods. I raised the binoculars again, but the light was gone. Not just moved, but completely gone. The spot where it had been was just empty sky like it never existed. I checked the area around it, scanning up and down, left and right, but no sign of it anywhere. I stayed out there for a while, just staring up, waiting to see if it would come back or if something else would happen. But the sky was normal, no other weird lights, no changes, just a bunch of regular stars doing what stars do. The next day, I told my sister Morgan about it. She's 2 years older and skeptical about anything strange, so she said I probably just saw a satellite or some kind of optical illusion. I thought that might be right at first, but I kept thinking about how solid and clear the split was. Satellites don't do that. I watch a lot of night sky stuff online. Later that week, I tried to find the exact spot in the sky again with the binoculars. Nothing. I couldn't find the star or whatever it was. I asked my parents if they noticed anything strange out at night, but they hadn't. Just the usual sounds of the woods. There was another thing that night, though. After the light disappeared, I thought I heard something in the trees, like a soft rustle, but not like wind. More like footsteps or something moving slowly through the brush. I called out to Juno, but she stayed still, staring off toward the tree line, her body tense. I didn't hear anything else, and after a minute, it went quiet again. It wasn't like the usual night sounds out here, the owls, the crickets, the distant dogs barking, but a different kind of silence, like something stopped paying attention. I've spent a lot of nights outside since then, looking up, but I haven't seen that star again, or anything like it. Juno still sometimes freezes and stares into the woods like she did that night, but nothing ever shows. I don't know what I saw. It wasn't a plane, not a drone, not a satellite. The way it moved was wrong for anything I'm familiar with. The woods around here are full of hunters and hikers, and we get occasional small planes flying over, but none of them do that. I guess that's why it sticks with me. Not because it scared me or made me feel like I was in a movie, but because it didn't fit. Just a white star splitting into 2 and then vanishing. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else saw it. I was working the night shift at the local radio monitoring station just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The place was quiet except for the hum of equipment and the occasional crackle from the receivers. My job was basically to sit there and listen. Monitor open frequencies for anything unusual, from emergency broadcasts to random chatter from far-flung corners of the spectrum. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me time to think. That night, the air was dry and cool, typical for early spring in the desert. The windows were cracked open a little, letting in the smell of sagebrush and a faint hint of wood smoke from some neighbor's fireplace. I had my old German shepherd Fenn curled up at my feet. Fenn wasn't much of a watchdog, but he was company, especially when the silence gets thick. Around midnight, I was scrolling through the VHF band, headphones on, jotting down odd snippets. Mostly static or distant chatter from some amateur operators. Then something caught my attention on a channel I usually ignored. It was faint, but definitely there, a series of pulses that repeated every 47 seconds. I thought maybe it was a glitch or some weird atmospheric interference. The pattern didn't match any known beacon or weather station I'd ever tracked. I started recording it, noting the exact times it hit, and tried tuning around the frequency. No other signals on the same band, just that strange pulse. After about half an hour, the pattern started changing slightly. The pulses weren't evenly spaced anymore. Sometimes the gaps got shorter, sometimes longer, but it never lost the basic rhythm. It was too regular to be random, but too erratic for a proper transmission. It reminded me of Morse code, but with no recognizable letters. Fenn stirred, low growl, ears up. I glanced down. He was staring out the window toward the dark pines lining the property. I told him it was nothing, just some radio noise, but I felt uneasy. The radio signal suddenly dropped out, replaced by static. Then, out of the white noise, a voice came through, soft, strained, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. It said, clear as day, don't look up. I froze. The words repeated 2 more times, each with a slight delay, as if someone was on the other end struggling to speak. I checked my gear, everything was normal. No one else was on the channel, and there was no way to trace the source. I tried talking back, said, hello? Hello? Where are you? But nothing came except the static hum. Fenn barked once, sharply, then went back to the floor, tail tucked. I sat back, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was some prank or an interference from a distant repeater, but it wasn't like anything I'd heard before. I glanced out the window. The sky was clear, stars scattered in their usual indifferent patterns. No flashes, no strange lights, just the quiet desert night. For the next hour, I kept listening, but the signal never returned. I even scanned other bands, checked the neighbors' radios. Nothing unusual. When dawn broke, I went outside with Fenn. The pine forest looked normal, the dirt roads still dusty and empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, just beyond the tree line. That day, I stayed home, unplugged the radios, and avoided looking up at the sky. The message replayed in my mind every time I did. I still don't know what it meant or where it came from, just that it was real enough to freeze me in place, sitting alone in a small radio shack in the middle of nowhere. The storm came out of nowhere, like it had been waiting until the last second to remind us who was really in charge around here. It was late summer, early September, and the kind of heavy rain that slams the windows and shakes the trees. I was home with my family, my wife Claire, our daughter Lila, and our golden retriever Hobbs. We live on the edge of Pine Ridge, which is just a few miles outside of the city but surrounded by thick woods. It's quiet out here, mostly dark after sundown, and storms can get really intense with how the wind funnels through the trees. The power cut out maybe 20 minutes after the first thunder hit. It was the kind of blackout that felt like the whole neighborhood just blinked out at once. 1 second, the lights were on, the TV was playing some stupid cooking show, and the next, everything went black, except for the flash of lightning outside. Claire lit some candles, and we gathered in the living room. Hobbs immediately laid down next to Lila, who was clutching her favorite stuffed bear. She was maybe 7 at the time, scared of the thunder like most kids. I sat by the window watching the rain hammer down on the yard. The wind made the old pines groan and bend low. At some point, the power kicked back on. It wasn't gradual, just a quick snap, and the lights flickered back to life. We all sighed, relieved, but then Claire said something that made me freeze. "Did you see the security cameras?" I hadn't thought to check. We'd set up a basic home security system a few months before, mostly because we live so close to the woods and sometimes deer or raccoons come close enough to set off the motion detectors. The footage is stored on a little DVR box in the laundry room. When I went to check it, I found the video files from the blackout period were all scrambled, just static and glitchy colors like the signal was broken or corrupted. But there was one frame, just one, frozen in the middle of all the noise. It was weird, grainy infrared footage that showed the edge of the tree line behind our backyard. And there, just standing in the shadows, was a silhouette. I couldn't make out much. It wasn't a person in any clear sense. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, but the shape was a little off. Slim, but somehow not quite human. The strangest part was the eyes. 2 bright points of light reflecting back, like you see in a dog or a cat at night. But these eyes were still, just staring back from the dark edge of the trees. I watched that frame over and over, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The rest of the video was unusable, like the system had been jammed or overwhelmed somehow. That night, I kept checking the backyard through the window, but all I could see were the usual shadows cast by the storm-battered trees. Hobbs growled low once or twice, but didn't rush to the door or try to go outside. Claire was quiet, not her usual chatter. Lila just hugged her bear and eventually fell asleep. The next day, we went out to check the yard. The rain had washed away any tracks, and nothing seemed out of place. No broken branches, no disturbed grass, no footprints leading to or from the tree line. It was like nothing had been there at all. I asked some neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange during the storm, but everyone was mostly just talking about the weather and the power outage. No one mentioned lights or noises or anything weird. It felt like I was the only one who saw something. I kept thinking about that single frame. What was it? A person with some kind of night vision gear? An animal? Something else? The eyes reflected light in a way that didn't match any animal I know around here. No deer, no coyote, no raccoon. And the shape wasn't right either. A few nights later, I stayed up late again, scanning the yard with a flashlight and watching the tree line. Hobbs was restless, pacing near the door. I thought I caught a flicker of movement just at the edge of the woods, but when I shone the light, nothing was there. The weirdest part was the silence. Usually at night, the forest is full of sounds. Crickets, frogs, the wind through the leaves. But that night, it was dead quiet, like the world held its breath. I don't know why we didn't call the cops or anyone else. Maybe because there was no proof, just a weird image on a camera no one else could see. Maybe because I didn't want to believe it was something that didn't have a simple explanation. Claire suggested maybe it was just some glitch, something caused by the storm messing with the cameras. But the way the eyes looked, like they were watching us, made me uneasy. Eventually, things went back to normal. The power stayed on, the cameras worked again. Hobbs stopped growling at night, but sometimes when the wind is right and the trees grown low outside, I find myself staring at the dark edge of the yard, wondering if whatever was there that night is still watching. My girlfriend and I were camping out near the Mojave, about 20 miles off the main highway. It was early April, not too hot during the day and chilly at night, but manageable. We'd camped before, mostly up north, but this was our first desert trip. The plan was to hike a little, stargaze, and just get out of cell service for a while. We drove my 4Runner down an old service road that cut through BLM land. No signage, no fences, just open land and low scrub. We didn't see another soul after leaving the pavement. Around dusk, we found a flat spot backed up to a rock formation. Good windbreak, solid ground not too far from where we parked. We set up the tent, rolled out the sleeping bags, ate some jerky and canned beans, the usual. No fire. We'd brought a camp stove but didn't use it that night. Just ate cold and watched the stars come out. It was crazy clear. I don't think I've ever seen the sky like that before. We laid there outside the tent for a while, just watching. Planes every now and then, satellites. Everything was normal. We turned in around 10 or 11. No animals, no wind, no noise at all, really. It got cold fast, but we brought good sleeping bags. I remember hearing one coyote far off before I fell asleep, but that was it. At some point during the night, I woke up. No noise woke me. I just opened my eyes. I was on my back, and I could see that the zipper on our tent door was open at the top, like 4 or 5 inches down from the peak. We'd closed it all the way before sleeping, I was sure of that. It was too cold not to. I sat up and looked around. My girlfriend was still asleep next to me, breathing steady. Nothing inside the tent looked disturbed. No bugs, no rustling, nothing missing. I didn't hear anything outside, but I still felt, I don't know, exposed. I leaned forward and zipped the door fully shut again, slow so I wouldn't wake her. Then I just sat there, listening. Not scared exactly, but alert. I stayed up maybe 20 minutes. There was nothing. No wind, no sounds, just that kind of dead silence you only get way out in places like that. Eventually, I laid back down and closed my eyes, but I don't think I really slept after that. When the sun came up, I was already awake. My girlfriend stirred next to me and asked if I'd unzipped the tent during the night. I told her no at first, then said, yeah. I had, because I saw it was open and zipped it back up. She looked at me funny, like maybe I was messing with her, but I wasn't. We stepped out of the tent to start making breakfast, and that's when we both stopped. Right in front of our tent, someone, or something, had taken the bundle of firewood we'd brought. Just a few sticks, maybe 8 or 10 pieces, in a mesh bag by the back tire, and arranged them in a perfect ring on the ground. Not stacked like for a fire. A flat, even ring. Every piece equidistant, maybe 3 feet across total, centered directly in front of our tent door. We hadn't touched the firewood. We hadn't planned on a fire. It hadn't been moved when we went to bed, I was sure of that, because I'd stepped over the bag on the way into the tent. The ground was sandy gravel. There weren't any boot prints or tire tracks, nothing around the ring either. Just the wood laid down like it had been measured out. We stood there for a while, not talking. It was bright out, fully daylight, but the silence felt wrong, like the whole place was holding its breath. Eventually, I walked around the perimeter of the camp. Nothing missing, nothing moved. Our cooler was untouched. Our packs were zipped. I looked for footprints or drag marks. Nothing. No animal sign either. The firewood itself was completely clean. No scratches, no soot, no bugs. Just dry sticks laid end to end in a circle. Not even a broken twig. I asked her again if she'd gotten up or heard anything. She hadn't. She's a light sleeper too. We both would have heard something approaching. But we didn't. After maybe 10 minutes of just standing there trying to figure it out, we packed up. No breakfast, no hike. We didn't talk much while tearing the tent down. Everything fit back into the 4Runner quick, and we got back to the road by 9 a.m. Later that afternoon, when we got back to town, I checked the firewood bag. It was empty. Not a single stick left inside. We never saw anyone else out there. No cars passed us on the way in or out. Nothing else ever came of it. Nothing followed us home. We never went back. I went solo hiking near Lake Crescent in Washington last October. Not deep into the backcountry or anything, just far enough off the main trail to feel like I was alone. I had the Friday off, packed light, and planned to camp overnight and head back in the morning. Nothing dramatic, just some quiet, maybe a few photos if the fog was nice. The weather was exactly how I hoped. Cold, damp, and quiet. Not raining, just that constant mist that sticks to your jacket and makes everything smell like pine and wet earth. I pitched my tent near a little rise overlooking the lake, close enough to hear the water lapping if the wind shifted, but far enough that I wouldn't accidentally roll into it if I slept weird. I got the tent up around 6 p.m. and made a quick dinner, ramen and a granola bar. No fire, since I didn't want to deal with permits or ashes. By 8, it was already dark enough that I turned in. I remember zipping up my bag, pulling my knit cap down over my ears, and listening for a while. It was quiet, just the usual woods sounds, a distant owl, maybe a mouther people on the trail the whole day, and I hadn't seen another car at the trailhead. It felt empty in a good way. At some point during the night, I woke up. I thought it was because I had to pee, but I checked my phone 2:47 a.m. and just lay there. I didn't feel cold or uncomfortable, just alert. Not scared exactly, but very aware of how thin the tent fabric was. I stayed still for a long time, trying to figure out if I'd heard something or if my body just decided to be awake. There weren't any loud noises, no branches snapping or animals moving around, just this heavy, unnatural stillness. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. When I got up in the morning, everything looked normal at first. Dew on the fly, fog sitting low in the trees. I opened the flap and stepped outside, stretching my legs and doing that half-awake zombie walk around the tent. That's when I saw them, footprints in the soft ground, leading away from my tent in a straight line. I crouched down and looked closer. They were mine. Same tread as my hiking boots, same stride length. but they weren't from the day before. I would have seen them when I set up camp. These were fresh. You could still see the sharp edges where the soil compressed. They went about 100 feet, then turned around and came straight back, right to the tent. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. The prints were clear, and there weren't any others around them. No animal tracks, no sign of anyone else. Just a straight path out and back, perfectly aligned. I kept trying to explain it away. Sleepwalking? But I'd never done that before. And I sleep in a mummy bag that I zip all the way up. It's not something you casually wriggle out of without waking up. And I know I didn't unzip the tent. I'm one of those paranoid campers who double checks the zippers every time. The door was still shut that morning, fully zipped from the inside. Still, I went over the whole site, checked my pack, my gear, looked for signs of anything disturbed. Nothing was missing. Nothing moved. My food bag was still hung where I'd left it, untouched. I followed the prints out to the point where they stopped. It was near a cluster of trees, just before the slope dipped toward the lake. The last pair of footprints turned around cleanly, like whoever made them had just reached a spot, paused, and walked back. There was no circling, no wandering, just out and back. I stood there at the turnaround spot, trying to remember anything. Any dream, any moment of waking, anything that might explain it. But there was nothing, just silence and fog. I hiked out by noon, quicker than I normally would. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone coming up the trail behind me. I didn't see anyone, but a few times I thought I heard branches shifting deeper in the woods. Not snapping, not footsteps, just movement, the kind that doesn't line up with wind. Back at the trailhead, my car was the only one there. I checked the doors and trunk just in case, even though I had the keys in my jacket pocket the whole time. Everything was fine. I started driving and didn't stop until I was back on the main highway. Later that night, I went through the photos on my phone. Just the usual, trees, water, a blurry shot of a crow that startled me by landing too close. But I noticed one that didn't make sense. It was a black frame, almost entirely dark. You could barely make out some faint light in the top corner, like a distant glow through branches. The timestamp said 3:04 a.m. My phone had been in my bag, zipped inside the tent. I never took it out that night. I don't remember taking that photo. I don't remember leaving the tent. But those footprints said I did. I was camping alone off an old Forest Service road just west of Bend, Oregon. This was late October, right before the snow really starts to stick. I'd gone out for a quick overnight, just needed to get out of town and clear my head. Nothing crazy, just a simple setup. One-man tent, sleeping pad, a jet boil, and my dog Nellie. She's a red heeler mix. Smart, a little neurotic, but a good trail dog. I'd rescued her from a shelter in Klamath Falls a couple years earlier, and she's been my go-to companion ever since. She sleeps light too, which I always appreciated out in the woods. Anyway, we parked just off a spur road that'd been chewed up by logging trucks and hadn't been graded in years. Hiked in, maybe a mile and a half to a clearing I'd been to once before. A flat patch near a shallow creek, surrounded by lodgepole pine and some younger firs. There was no cell service out there, which I liked. Just the sound of the wind and the occasional squirrel freaking out. I set up camp around 5 p.m., just as the lights started to go. It had been a gray, damp day, cold, but not freezing. The kind of weather that settles in your bones if you stop moving for too long. I made a small fire, cooked a pack of ramen, and gave Nellie some kibble. She wandered the edge of the clearing while I ate, nose to the ground, tail up. Around 7:30, it was already getting dark, so I packed out the fire and climbed into the tent. I had my Garmin watch on, just a basic GPS tracking model I used for trail runs and hikes. I always sleep with it on when I'm out alone. Not for any particular reason, just habit. Sometimes I'll check my heart rate or altitude in the morning. That night, I remember checking the battery before I went to sleep, 71%. I didn't set an alarm. I woke up once around 2 a.m. because Nellie growled. Not a full bark, just a low, deep-throated warning. I sat up, unzipped the sleeping bag, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no branches breaking, no distant engines, just wind moving through the trees. I put a hand on Nellie's back and she stayed rigid for a minute, then laid back down. I figured maybe a deer or a raccoon had wandered close. That wasn't unusual. I didn't really fall back asleep after that. I dozed on and off, mostly listening. Nothing else happened. It was one of those long nights where the dark feels like it stretches on forever. I didn't hear Nellie make another sound. When the sky finally started to lighten around 6:45, I got out of the tent, stretched, and fired up the jet boil for coffee. Nellie trotted a little circle around the clearing, sniffed the air, then sat near the tent and stared into the trees. Not unusual, just watchful. It wasn't until I sat down with the coffee that I remembered to check the watch. I pulled it up like I always do, just curiosity, seeing what my sleep heart rate looked like. But when I toggled to the GPS history, I saw something weird. A track had been logged between 1:58 a.m. and 2:44 a.m. It was labeled walk, which was already odd because I hadn't moved from the tent. The start time lined up almost exactly with when Nellie had growled. The GPS path showed a near-perfect circle. It looped around my tent about 15 feet out. A smooth, uninterrupted line, no erratic jumps, no doubling back. It completed 4 laps, then stopped. Total distance, 0.57 miles. Duration, 46 minutes. Average pace, 20 minutes per mile. It made no sense. I sat there for a long time, staring at the little red trail on the screen. I thought maybe I'd rolled over in my sleep and somehow triggered the motion sensor, but the shape was too clean, too even, and I never left the tent. I was awake for most of that time, I was sure of it. I looked around the clearing for footprints. The soil was soft, damp in spots. I expected to see something, my own prints from the day before, Nellie's paw marks, but nothing fresh. No sign of someone or something circling us. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a glitch, that maybe the watch picked up a false signal. But then I looked at Nellie again. She hadn't moved from her spot. She was still staring into the trees. Not tense, not afraid, just locked in, watching. I packed up fast. Coffee half drunk, tent still damp. I didn't even bother rolling the sleeping bag properly, just stuffed it in the sack and clipped it to my pack. Nellie stuck close the whole time, which wasn't like her. Normally she'd wander as I packed, but that morning she didn't go more than a few feet from me. We hiked out quick. I kept glancing back toward the clearing, even though I couldn't see it anymore. Every crack of a branch made me twitch. When we got back to the car, I sat there for a while before starting it. Turned the watch off completely. I didn't delete the track, but I haven't opened it again either. It's still in the history, labeled walk. I haven't been back to that spot since. I was hiking alone, like I usually do. I prefer it that way. No distractions, just me and the trail. That morning, I left my phone off and in my pack except for the earbuds, which I had plugged into my phone earlier but then unplugged because I like to listen to the sounds around me. Still, I kept the earbuds in my ears, more out of habit than anything else. The trail was quiet, typical for midweek, early fall. The trees were just starting to change colors, and the air had that crisp, slightly damp feel you get when the sun's still low but climbing. I'd been walking for maybe an hour, nothing unusual, just the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional bird call. Then, out of nowhere, I started hearing this noise in my earbuds. It wasn't music or anything I recognized. It was faint at first, like static, but it had a rhythm, like a conversation, only it wasn't any language I knew. It was garbled, almost electronic, but distorted, like an old radio picking up a weak signal. It reminded me a little of those sci-fi shows where aliens are trying to communicate, but you can't quite understand them. At first, I thought maybe it was someone playing a prank nearby, or that the earbuds had malfunctioned and were picking up some weird interference. But the weird part was, my phone was zipped away in my backpack and completely off. I double-checked before leaving. I stopped walking and pulled out the earbuds to check. They were unplugged, just dangling in my hands and totally silent once disconnected from the phone. When I put them back in, the noise came back, soft but clear enough to make my skin crawl. I figured maybe I was just tired or imagining it, so I kept walking. But the noise stayed, low, rhythmic, like voices talking back and forth. Not human voices, though. I swear it was something else. It didn't make sense, but it was definitely there. I glanced behind me, expecting to see another hiker or someone messing around, But the trail was empty. No one. Just trees and the fading light of the afternoon. The more I listened, the more unsettled I got. The sounds weren't like any language or code I'd ever heard, but they weren't random either. They felt deliberate, like something was trying to talk through the earbuds. I slowed down and looked around. The forest felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. I realized I was holding my breath without thinking about it. Then, suddenly, the noises stopped. I hadn't moved, but I glanced back the way I'd come, like something about the air shifted. It was quieter, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I turned around slowly, scanning the trees and the underbrush, but still nothing there. The only sound was my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears louder than before. I decided to take out the earbuds and put them away for real this time. As soon as I did, the forest seemed to breathe again. The birds started calling. The wind picked up just enough to shake leaves down. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I kept hiking back the way I came, sticking to the main trail. The whole time, I couldn't get the feeling off that I was being watched, like something had been following me, just out of sight. By the time I got back to my car, it was dark enough that the parking lot lights flickered on. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, no strange signals or anything. I don't know what that noise was or why it came through my unplugged earbuds. I'm not the kind to freak out over stuff like this, but that day felt different. Like something was there, just beyond the edge of what I could see or hear, trying to make contact without really showing itself. I'm not sure I want to go back to that trail alone again, so... The storm came on fast that night. We were all sitting around in the living room, me, my wife, and our 2 kids, when the power cut out. 1 second everything was fine, then the lights just blinked off. Total blackout. No streetlights, no neighbors' houses visible at first through the windows, just the sound of heavy rain and wind hammering against the siding. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight app, but the battery was down to 10%. My wife lit a couple of candles while the kids huddled close, trying not to freak out. The rain was coming down so hard it drowned out pretty much everything else. Thunder cracked overhead like a drum. After a few minutes, I looked outside the front window to check the street. That's when I noticed something weird. Every house on the block was lit up, like bright lights glowing through every window, as if the power was still on for them. But not ours. Our house was pitch black, except for the flickering candlelight inside. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. I even stepped outside onto the porch, holding the phone's weak light in front of me. The street was soaked and shiny from the rain, and every other house had lights on. Living room lamps, porch lights, TVs maybe. Some kind of glow that showed people were inside. I saw movement in a couple of windows, silhouettes walking around. But our house was dead silent. No light coming from anywhere. I called out to my wife, who came to the door, looking puzzled too. We stood there together watching the street, trying to figure out what was going on. Then I noticed it. Above the backyard, something was glowing softly. It wasn't lightning or anything like that. It was a steady, pulsing light that shifted colors from pale blue to a dull green, almost like it was breathing. I pointed it out, and my wife saw it too. The kids were staring from the kitchen window, wide-eyed. I went around to the back door, opened it, and stepped outside into the cold rain. The light hung maybe 30 feet above the treetops at the edge of our yard. The trees swayed in the wind, casting long shadows in the glow. The rain was heavy, but the light didn't seem affected by it. It stayed steady, pulsing like a heartbeat. I tried to call my parents, who live a few miles away, but no signal on my phone. No calls, no texts, nothing. The power was definitely out here. My wife grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and shone it toward the light, but it made no difference. The glow wasn't coming from any physical source I could see. No bulbs, no wires, nothing attached to the trees. I stepped further into the yard, feeling my way in the dark, trying to get closer, but the rain was soaking through my jacket and chilling me fast. The light seemed to pulse a little faster as I moved, almost like it was aware I was there. I told my wife to stay inside with the kids, but she followed me outside anyway. We stood together, looking up at the light and listening to the storm. After a few minutes, the pulsing slowed and dimmed, then suddenly vanished. The sky was just dark again. It was like it had been there 1 second, and then just gone. I looked back toward the street. The other house's lights were still on, but when I turned around to go back inside, I noticed something else. Our house still had no power, but the clock on the microwave was flashing like it had just lost power and come back on. I went inside, flipped the kitchen light switch. Nothing. Checked the fuse box. All the breakers were fine. No signs of an outage inside, no sparking or anything weird. We sat back down in the living room with the candles, a little shaken. The kids were quiet, clearly uncomfortable, but too young to really know what to think. My wife and I exchanged glances, but said nothing out loud. A little later, when the rain let up, I looked outside again. The other house's lights were still on, no sign they had any problem. The whole street seemed normal except for us. I checked my phone again. No signal, no connection to anything. I looked up at the sky, expecting to see clouds or maybe a storm moving past, but it was just dark, nothing unusual. I asked my wife if she wanted to check the neighbors' houses, but she said no, too risky in the rain and dark. We just stayed inside, watching the street, hoping the power would come back. Hours passed. Our power never returned, but the neighbors' houses stayed lit all night. When morning finally came, the sun was up and the storm was gone. I stepped outside in daylight, expecting to see something unusual in the backyard where the light had been, but everything looked normal. The grass was wet, the trees shook with the morning breeze, and nothing out of place. I walked down the street to check with the neighbors. Everyone said their power had been fine all night. No outages, no flickers, no weird lights. Back home, I checked all the circuits again, no problems. The power company said no outages in the area. I still can't explain what happened that night. The light, the blackout in our house while the street was lit, the silence, the feeling like something was watching us from the trees. The whole thing just feels like a glitch, something off in reality that I can't put my finger on. And sometimes when the power goes out and the wind is right, I find myself looking out the back window, half expecting to see that pulsing light waiting in the sky. We were somewhere west of Denver, cruising at 31,000 feet. Night shift, smooth air, stars clear as glass. I'd flown this route maybe 24 times before. Portland to Kansas City, just a quiet red eye over the Rockies. It was January, I think. Cold as hell on the ground, but steady up high. Co-pilot that night was Tyler, younger guy, former Air Force, sharp. Not much of a talker unless he was on his second cup of coffee, which he wasn't yet. We were about an hour into the flight. Nothing unusual. We had checked in with Denver Center, got handed off, and I was just staring out the left side window, watching the edge of the world slide by. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't a star. It wasn't another plane. I know what anti-collision lights look like. I know what satellites look like. This was none of those. It was flashing, not blinking. There's a difference. Not rhythmic like a strobe, more like a camera flash. Bright, short bursts of white light. 2 or 3 flashes close together, then dark. A pause. Then it'd repeat. No color, no red or green wing lights, just white. And it wasn't above or below us. It was dead level with us. Same altitude, maybe a mile off the port side. I leaned forward a little and tapped the glass with my knuckle, just out of habit, like that would help me see it clearer. "Tyler," I said. "You see that?" He looked up from the display. "See what?" I pointed. The light flashed again, 3 quick bursts. "That." He turned his head, squinting. "Where?" I kept my finger up, tracking it. "Left side, 10 o'clock. Same level." He leaned toward the window, trying to spot it. Another flash. I saw it clear as anything. Same spot, same pattern. But Tyler didn't react. "I don't see it," he said. I watched for another full minute. It flashed 2 more times, same sequence each time. Then it went dark completely. I radioed in, "Denver Center, horizon 297. We've got a flashing light at our altitude. 10 o'clock position, maybe 1 to 2 miles out. Can you confirm any traffic out here?" There was a pause. "Horizon 297, negative radar contact in your vicinity. You're clear for 100 miles in all directions." I glanced at Tyler. He was staring at the nav screen now, probably double-checking our position. I could tell he was trying to reason it out, Weather balloon, drone, whatever, but he didn't say anything. We didn't talk much for the next 10 minutes. I kept glancing out the window. It didn't flash again. Then I felt the nose pitch slightly. Not much, just enough that I thought maybe we were in light turbulence. But there was nothing on the scope. No shear, no chop. I checked the instruments. Everything was normal. Tyler looked at me. Did you feel that? Yeah. We checked the controls. No faults. Airspeed steady, pressure normal. Then, something weird happened. The cabin lights flickered. Just for a second. We've got emergency backup, so it wasn't a concern flight-wise, but still, LEDs like that don't just flicker. They either work or they don't. I radioed again. Denver Center, Horizon 297, we just had a minor electrical anomaly. Cabin lights flickered. No warning indicators. Another pause. Copy that, Horizon. Weather's clear all the way through to Kansas. No reported anomalies. We flew on. 15 minutes later, Tyler said, "Okay, I just felt that again." The nose dipped slightly, then corrected on its own. Autopilot was still engaged, but it was like the aircraft made a micro-adjustment without any input. Too subtle to trigger a warning. That's when I noticed the hum, not the engines. You fly long enough, you learn to tune that out. This was, I don't know, higher pitched. Almost like feedback through a headset, but not quite. More like pressure. My ears popped once, then again, like we were climbing, but we weren't. "Cabin pressure's stable," Tyler said, reading my mind. Then, boom, light again. Same spot, 10 o'clock, 3 quick flashes. But this time I felt something else, a split-second disorientation. Like my depth perception shifted, or the horizon moved slightly off level, only for a heartbeat, and then everything was back to normal. I turned fully toward the window. Nothing. Black sky. "I saw it again," I said. Tyler looked over. I didn't. That's when I noticed he looked pale. Not scared exactly, more off. Like something was bothering him, but he couldn't pin it down. He said, "What time is it?" I checked my watch. He checked his own. I had 2:40. We compared them. Both synced pre-flight. Cockpit clock said 2:12. Nothing lined up. Weird, but sometimes cockpit clocks drift a little, especially if the maintenance guys haven't calibrated. But both our watches being off by over 30 minutes, that didn't sit right. We crossed into Kansas airspace a little after 3. Clear skies, tailwind picked up. No more lights, no more weird dips. We landed on schedule. Ground crew didn't mention anything. I filed the anomaly report, logged it as an electrical flicker, and unconfirmed light sighting. No one asked questions. No one ever does. When we got to the hotel, Tyler didn't say much. He just nodded, said goodnight, and went to his room. Next day, I asked him again, "You really didn't see anything?" He shook his head. No light, just felt strange. I pushed a little. "Like what?" He paused, like something was right there, just out of view, but I couldn't look straight at it. We left it at that. A few weeks later, I flew that route again. Different co-pilot, same time, same altitude, no lights, but I kept looking. I was out in my backyard, about 10 miles outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, just like I do most clear nights. I've been into amateur astronomy for years, nothing fancy, just a decent telescope and a DSLR camera on a tripod. That night, it was a dry, cool evening with almost no wind, perfect for stargazing. I had my border collie Scout with me. He's usually more interested in chasing rabbits. But that night he seemed calm, just lying near my feet. I was testing some new camera settings on the tripod, trying to capture the Milky Way. After an hour or so of fiddling, I put the telescope away and decided to just watch the sky with my naked eyes for a bit. Then, around 11:17 p.m., something caught my attention. A really bright light moving across the sky, roughly west to east. At first, I thought it was a satellite, or maybe the International Space Station, but it was moving differently. The light was steady, no blinking, and pretty intense, brighter than any plane or satellite I'd seen in years of stargazing. I grabbed my camera, aimed it toward the light, and started recording. What was odd was how smooth it moved. No blinking lights, no noise at all. The neighborhood was quiet except for Scout's occasional sigh. I kept my eyes on the light through my camera's screen. Then it did something weird. Instead of continuing its path across the sky, it just stopped. Like, just froze mid-flight. No slowing down, no hesitation, just stopped. It held its position for maybe 5 seconds. Then, without any warning, it shot straight up, almost straight up from the horizon toward the zenith. It accelerated insanely fast, way faster than any commercial or military aircraft I know of. There was no contrail, no sound, no sonic boom, nothing. I was blinking, not quite believing what I was seeing. Scout looked up too, ears perked but didn't bark or run. The light disappeared into the darkness above the stars in maybe 2 seconds. I lowered the camera and stared for a long time. The sky was empty again, except for the usual stars. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but I kept looking for any sign of the light coming back. Later, I checked the footage on my laptop. The brightness and the way the light moved were clear. I zoomed in as much as I could, but there was no shape around the light, no wings, no tail, no structure, just a bright point moving on its own. I thought maybe it was a drone, but I've never seen anything fly that fast, that high, without noise or blinking navigation lights. Military jets make noise for miles, and missiles or rockets leave trails and explosions. This had none of those. Over the next few days, I asked some friends who work at the local airport and the university's astronomy club if they saw anything similar. Nothing. The FAA flight tracker showed no flights matching that path or time. The weirdest part is the way it stopped and then went straight up without any sound or visible acceleration effects. I replayed that moment on the video over and over. The light just hung there, like it was suspended by something invisible, then zipped up like it was weightless. I double-checked the camera settings and timestamp. Everything was normal. The GPS clock on the camera matched my phone's time. Scout has been acting strange since then. He won't come into the backyard after dark, and sometimes he stares up at the sky for minutes, low growling and stiff-legged. That's not like him at all. I still go out stargazing, but I haven't seen anything like that light again. And honestly, I don't know what to make of it. It didn't feel threatening or ominous, just odd. I keep telling myself there must be some logical explanation, maybe a new kind of experimental aircraft, but nobody will tell me anything. The FAA folks just shrug. Whatever it wasn't like anything I've seen before. Just a bright, silent light moving on its own terms, stopping, then vanishing straight up into the sky like it didn't belong here. I don't have answers. Just that footage and the memory of a night that didn't add up. It started somewhere outside of Holbrook, Arizona, right where the 377 forks off from the 277. I was heading north, hauling a flatbed of industrial piping back up toward Farmington. Real quiet night, clear sky, desert cold, nothing but open road and the occasional tumbleweed crossing like it had somewhere to be. This stretch of highway doesn't get much traffic after midnight, especially in late November. I'd been out there maybe 45 minutes past the last gas station. Hadn't seen a single car for miles. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the low hum of the engine. I was sipping from a lukewarm thermos of gas station coffee when I noticed it. A single headlight in my rearview mirror. Not close but visible. Just one light, steady and low to the ground. My first thought was a motorcycle. Maybe a dirt bike with a busted beam. But even then, who's riding out here in the middle of the night? I kept glancing back as I drove. The light stayed the same distance behind me. Never gaining, never fading. After about 10 minutes, I slowed down a little. Not brake slamming, just eased off the gas to see if it would catch up. The headlight slowed too, same pace. Still that same gap between us. I tapped my brakes a few times. No response. Eventually, I pulled off at one of those gravel runoffs, a spot with a faded old cattle gate and a rusted no trespassing sign. Juno, my red-boned coonhound, lifted her head in the passenger seat, gave me a slow blink, and laid back down. I watched the mirror. Nothing came around the bend. I waited maybe 5 minutes. No engine noise, no light. I stepped out, let the door creak shut, and walked a few feet toward the road, listening. All I could hear was the wind pushing through the low brush and the metal ticking of my engine cooling off. I walked around to the back of the truck with my flashlight. Nothing behind me except empty blacktop disappearing into the dark. I climbed back in and drove off. Chalked it up to a trick of distance. Maybe the guy turned off somewhere. But 20 minutes later, there it was again. Same headlight, same distance. This time, I watched it more closely. It never bobbed or wavered like a motorcycle usually would. It was smooth, unnaturally smooth, like it was gliding. I flipped on my CB and asked if anyone else was nearby, but there was just static and silence. I tried again to slow down. The light stayed back. I passed a small maintenance turnout and decided to stop again. This time, I left the engine running and got out quick. The light vanished the second I hit the brakes. I ran back a bit on foot, maybe 100 yards. Juno jumped out after me, sniffing the air like she smelled something strange. Her tail was stiff, her ears up. I stood there a while. Again, no sounds, no lights. Just dry air and the buzz of power lines somewhere far off. When I walked back to the truck, I checked the road for tire marks, anything. It had rained a couple days before, so there were still patches of soft dirt at the shoulder, but there weren't any tracks, not even mine from earlier. Back in the cab, I drove on with one hand gripping the wheel a little tighter than I'd admit. I kept my eyes on the mirror for another stretch. Nothing. Then, half an hour later, near a cluster of butts, I saw it again. One light, same exact spot behind me, same height off the ground. That time I didn't stop. I just stared at it for maybe 10 minutes straight, barely blinking. Juno started whining, low and nervous. She usually doesn't react to much, but she kept glancing at the side window like she expected something to be there. I tried something different. I hit the brakes hard and killed my headlights. Pitch black. When my eyes adjusted, the headlight behind me was still there. Bright as ever. Too bright, even. It didn't cast the kind of glow it should have. Nothing lit up around it. No shine on the asphalt, no beam. Just a perfect sharp point of white. And then it blinked out. No fade, no slow dip below the horizon. Just gone. I sat there in the dark, heart thumping in my ears. A minute passed. 2. 3. I turned the lights back on, pulled back onto the road, and kept going. No more headlight. I made it to Farmington just after 4 a.m., dropped off the trailer, signed the logbook, and went to the lot where I usually crash for a few hours before heading back. I stepped out, stretched, and looked at the sky. Above me, it was completely clear. Stars like powdered sugar scattered across black glass. And off to the east, way up high, higher than any plane I've ever seen, there was a faint white dot. It hovered for a moment. Then it shot to the left, faster than anything I've watched in my 30 years of driving. Just a blur. Then gone. Juno let out a single sharp bark, then laid down by the wheel well like nothing happened. I didn't sleep that morning. Just sat in the cab, engine idling, waiting for the sun. I was driving west on Highway 95, about 30 miles south of Tonopah. It was just past midnight. I'd left Ely earlier that evening after a late dinner with my cousin, and I figured I'd stop in Beatty for the night. I wasn't in a rush, just didn't feel like staying over. The road was quiet, no other cars for miles, and the only light came from the dash and my high beam stretching out over the cracked blacktop. I've done that drive more times than I can count. I used to run deliveries out that way, sometimes even slept in the truck if I didn't feel like finding a room. That stretch near the test range is always kind of eerie, even when nothing weird's going on. You can drive for hours without seeing a gas station, and the desert feels empty in a way that's hard to explain. Anyway, I was sipping from a warm bottle of water, half listening to some old AM station fuzzing in and out, when I noticed the lights. 3 of them, almost straight ahead in the sky, maybe 30 degrees up. They were small, bright white points, but clearer than stars. I figured they were aircraft at first, flying in some kind of formation. That wouldn't have been unusual out there with all the military stuff nearby. They moved slowly. Perfect triangle, equidistant. I kept expecting one to blink or bank, or for there to be engine noise, but there was nothing. No sound, and they didn't flash. Just solid white. I turned the radio off and cracked the window, trying to hear anything. Wind, jets, rotor blades. But there was nothing except the tires on pavement. The odd thing was how steady they were. Commercial planes usually drift a little or wobble in formation. These didn't. They held the exact spacing for at least 5 minutes while I kept glancing up at them. They weren't following the road exactly, but they were staying roughly parallel. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look. At some point, I pulled over onto the shoulder and shut the engine off. Total silence. I stepped out of the truck. The lights were still there, maybe a little lower now. Then, out of nowhere, they split. Each one darted off in a different direction. One shot left, one up, one straight back. They moved so fast I barely tracked it. No curves, just instant movement. They were gone. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just seen. I thought maybe it was some kind of test aircraft, drones maybe, but I've never seen anything move like that, especially not without any sound. It wasn't until I turned back toward the truck that I saw they'd come back. Same 3 lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. That part freaked me out more than the scattering. I hadn't seen them return. I was looking right in that part of the sky. No movement. They were just suddenly back. I got in the truck, turned the key, and drove. Didn't floor it or anything. I didn't want to draw attention, but I wanted to put some distance between me and whatever that was. I kept checking the mirrors and glancing up through the windshield, but the lights stayed where they were for a while. Just tracking, it seemed like. Never closing in. Never fading out. Then they blinked off again. Not moved. Just off, like someone flipped a switch. That was the last I saw them. About 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset. Just flickered out, then came back with the wrong time. Something like 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, like I'd just turned the truck on for the first time. That kind of thing doesn't usually happen while you're driving. I pulled into Beatty around 1:30 and checked into one of those little motels across from the gas station. The guy at the desk gave me a weird look. Said I looked pale. I told him I'd had a long drive. In the room, I sat on the bed for a while with the TV on mute, just trying to go back through it all in my head. I didn't fall asleep until the sky started getting light, and even then, it didn't feel like I really slept. We'd started the hike around 10 in the morning. It was supposed to be just a day trip. Me, Jason, Liz, and Mark. We parked off a dirt road outside of Newberry Springs and followed a trail Jason had marked on his GPS. It was barely a path. Just old BLM land he said he'd explored once before. Nothing official. No shade, just sun-baked rocks and dry washes winding through low hills. Classic Mojave. We packed light. Just water, jerky, a couple Cliff Bars each. Mark brought a beat-up Nikon and Liz had her little drone. I was just happy to get out of the city for a day. It was hot as hell by noon. No wind, barely any sound besides our boots crunching and the occasional buzzing fly. We'd passed a rusted-out shell of a truck, probably from the 60s, sitting half buried in the sand. Liz took a few pictures. Jason joked that it looked like it had just been dropped there from the sky. By the time we hit the ridge Jason wanted to reach, the sun was dropping low, maybe 5:30. We sat for a bit, shared what was left of the food, and watched the hills go dark. I remember looking at my phone around 6. I had no service, but the GPS was still working. I'd marked our truck on the map and figured we had enough daylight to head back before it got tricky. That's when we saw the light. At first it looked like a star, except too low and too bright. It wasn't blinking like a plane, and it was dead silent, just hovering there, maybe 100 feet up, no shape, just this pale white orb. It didn't flicker, just sat in the sky above the wash. Nobody said anything right away. I think we were all just staring at it, trying to make it fit into something normal. Then it started moving, slow, smooth, like it was gliding without any resistance. It drifted over the ridge, then stopped again. Still no sound, not even the hum you get from a drone or chopper. Liz pulled out her phone to film it, held it up, and cursed. "It's dead," she said. "I had 60% like 20 minutes ago." I checked mine. Screen was black, wouldn't even boot. Jason's too. Mark's camera wouldn't turn on either, even though he'd barely used it. We stood there for another minute, watching this thing hover. It started moving again, faster this time, then blinked out. Just gone. Not behind a cloud, not fading, just there 1 second and gone the next. That's the last thing I remember clearly. The next thing I knew, we were walking, heading downhill. Jason was in front, Liz and Mark behind. I remember thinking it was darker than it should have been, like we'd missed sunset completely. I pulled out my phone again, and this time it lit up. 8:12 p.m., battery back at 47%. The trail on the GPS showed we were way off course, like we'd veered half a mile south without realizing it. I stopped and asked, "Does anyone remember the last hour?" Jason turned around. "What do you mean?" "After the light disappeared," I said. "We didn't start walking right away, did we?" Mark looked confused. "I thought we did." "No," Liz said. "We stood there for a while, didn't we?" Nobody could agree on how long we'd been standing on that ridge. No one remembered packing up or deciding to head back, and none of us remembered the sun going down. We argued about it for a bit, then decided to just keep moving. The truck wasn't far, and none of us liked the idea of being out there any longer than necessary. We made it back just after 9. The air felt heavy. Still hot, but with this weird static in it, like before a thunderstorm, except there weren't any clouds. When we got to the truck, the first thing I noticed was that the clock on the dash was blinking. Jason's battery had died, apparently, though the dome light still worked. He swore it had been fine that morning. We jump-started it using Mark's jumper pack and got out of there fast. Later that night, I checked the GPS history on my phone. It showed a gap between 6:08 and 7:55. The trail line just stopped, then picked up again further down the ridge, already headed back toward the road. I checked the health data too, steps, elevation, all of it, and it was like we hadn't moved at all during that time. No movement, no heart rate spikes, nothing. Liz swore up and down she'd filmed the light before her phone died, but there was no video. Just a corrupted file labeled DCIM 11123, wouldn't open. Mark's camera had one photo that was just a white blur. He didn't remember taking it. We all met up 2 days later at a diner in Barstow to compare notes. Everyone felt weird. Not sick, exactly, just tired and off. Like we hadn't really rested since the hike. Jason said he kept hearing this high-pitched hum at night. Liz's smartwatch wouldn't sync with her phone anymore. Mark started having nosebleeds, which he never used to get. And I kept waking up at exactly 2:17 a.m. every night for a week. Eventually things went back to normal. Phones worked, cameras worked, we all stopped talking about it. Not because we forgot, just because we didn't know what to say. I've done plenty of hikes since then, but I haven't been back to the Mojave. None of us have. And it was a Phoenix to Portland run, mid-March. I was in the left seat, Captain John Presley, flying a 737-800. Smooth flight, cruising at 30,000 feet, light headwinds. We were just past Salt Lake, flying over southeastern Idaho. Clear skies above, some scattered cloud layers below us around 20,000. It was a routine flight, boring even. We'd been handed off to Salt Lake Center and the radios were pretty quiet for that stretch. My co-pilot Renee had just taken over the controls while I sipped my coffee and ran through the weather ahead. Around 2:10 p.m., I glanced out the left side. There was a break in the clouds down below, maybe 8,000 or 10,000 feet beneath us. That's when I saw it. A metallic object just sitting there, maybe halfway between our altitude and the clouds, so probably around 25,000 feet. Dead still, not drifting, not rotating, just hovering in midair. It wasn't a balloon. I've seen plenty of those, and they move with the wind or tumble. This didn't. It was smooth, oval, almost like a flattened pill, and reflective, catching the sunlight on the top curve. At first I thought maybe I was seeing another aircraft at a strange angle, but there were no contrails, no wings, no motion. I leaned forward and pointed it out to Renee. "You seeing that?" She squinted, followed my finger, and after a second said, "Yeah, what is that?" I don't know how long we watched it, probably 30 seconds. That doesn't sound like a long time, but up there with nothing else going on, it felt long. It didn't change altitude or orientation. It just was. Then it shot upward, not diagonally, straight up, like it had been yanked by a wire. No arc, no acceleration curve. 1 second it was there, the next it was just gone. I blinked and scanned the sky for it, thinking maybe it had moved laterally, but there was nothing. Clear blue all the way up. Renee looked over at me. "Did it just..." "Yeah," I said. Neither of us said anything for a while. I was waiting for a TCAS alert, something to indicate another aircraft had come close, but nothing showed. I keyed the mic. "Salt Lake Center, Southwest 2208. Southwest 2208, go ahead. Just wondering if you have any traffic about 10 miles south of us, maybe around flight level 250? There was a pause. Negative, Southwest 2208. No traffic in that vicinity. You say 250? Affirmative. Something metallic, no transponder. Another pause. Copy that. We'll log it. Nothing on radar at that altitude in your sector. That was it. They didn't ask for a report or anything. About 10 minutes later, Renee asked me if I was going to file anything when we landed. I told her I'd think about it, but I never did. We both agreed it wasn't a drone. Too high, too still, too fast when